Hey everyone, welcome to Paranormal M. I hope you're doing well tonight. We're starting with a story about a 9-year-old boy named Jake, whose parents notice that he keeps avoiding his bedroom at night. Before we get into it, please subscribe to the channel, and if you have a strange experience you can't explain, feel free to send it to me. This one begins with something small, just a closet door Jake doesn't want left open. But for his dad, that little detail becomes hard to ignore. Get comfortable, and I hope you all sleep well tonight. Hey there. I want to share something really personal about my son Jake, who's 9 years old. Lately, we've noticed he's been having trouble sleeping in his own room. Now, this didn't just start overnight. It gradually became clear when he began asking for one of us to stay with him, or would just end up in our bed. What's unusual is that Jake has never been afraid to sleep alone since he was a baby. But recently, he's been making excuses, playing little games, anything to avoid going to his room by himself. Jake's never been one to fear the dark or have nightmares. When we moved into this new house, he adjusted really quickly. The only time he had bad dreams was last year during the whole pandemic scare. He was worried about us getting sick, and it really shook him up. We had to make a rule to turn off the news because it was affecting him so much. Last night, it really hit a peak. My wife was putting away clothes in Jake's closet, and he suddenly freaked out about the closet doors being open. That's when it hit me. I realized I'd hardly ever seen those doors open before. I asked my wife if she always closed them, and she said no, Jake didn't want them open. That scared me because it wasn't like him at all. I sat down with Jake on his bed and told him he could tell me anything. For nearly 45 minutes, he just shook his head, avoiding my questions. So I said, "If anyone or anything is telling you not to tell me, it's okay. I'm your dad, and I can fix it." I thought maybe a kid at school, a cousin, or even something he saw on YouTube was scaring him, but he said no one had scared him about the closet. I tried to explain that sometimes old houses make noises because the wood expands and contracts, and it's normal. Then I asked if there was something in the closet that scared him, something I could get rid of. That's when he started crying quietly. I held him close and told him it was okay, that he wasn't in trouble and that it was my job to keep him safe. I looked him in the eyes and gently asked him to tell me what it was. With tears rolling down, he looked down and said, "The skulls come out at night from the floor and watch me while I sleep." I wasn't expecting that, and honestly, my stomach tightened. I told him it was okay. Sometimes our imagination plays tricks on us and makes us scared. I asked when this started, and he said it wasn't nightmares. They come after he wakes up and sees them. I explained to him that imagination can give us good ideas, but sometimes, especially when we're trying to sleep, it can give us scary thoughts. I promised that when I sleep in his room, he can tell me or show me if he's scared, and I'll check it out. But he still insists on keeping his closet doors shut. It's been tough, but I'm grateful he trusts me enough to share this. As a dad, I'm doing everything I can to help him feel safe and loved. Hey, I want to share this little story from when I was a university student working as a cleaner. I had this job cleaning offices overnight, which was perfect because they didn't really care what time you came in, as long as the work was done between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. One particular place I cleaned every Thursday was a law firm on the top floor of a heritage building downtown. It was a 6-story building with a rich, eerie history. They said it used to be a brothel, and that the site was once the town square where hangings happened. So you can imagine how that made me want to wrap up my cleaning quickly each night. The law firm's floor was designed in a circle, with reception by the elevator, washrooms to the right, individual offices around the edges, a big boardroom in the center, and the staff break room on the opposite side. Every time I stepped off the elevator, I'd get this odd feeling like someone was there, even though the place was empty. The later it got, the stronger that feeling became. One night, I got to the office pretty late, close to midnight, after staying late at school. As soon as the elevator doors opened, I heard voices, laughter. It sounded like some women were chatting away in the break room, and honestly, I felt relieved. I was a bit scared being alone so late, so I walked toward the break room, calling out a friendly hello to let them know I was there. But when I turned the corner, the voices stopped, and the room was completely empty. I stood there, frozen for a moment, then figured maybe they were in one of the offices on the other side. So I kept calling out as I went around the floor, but no one was there. The whole building was empty. Yet that chatter I heard was so clear it gave me chills. When I finally made my way back to the elevator, it opened on its own. I didn't stick around after that. I just got my card on the elevator and left as fast as I could. Honestly, that night was hands down one of the creepiest experiences I've had. Just thinking about it now gives me the chills. No way am I ever going back there after dark alone again. Hey, I want to share something a little strange that happened to me when I was a kid. Maybe you've experienced something like this too. So, there were 2 times I just fell into this really deep, almost unconscious sleep. The first time was during summer break when I was home alone because my parents were at work. I heard a noise coming from their bedroom and went to check it out, thinking maybe it was a mouse or something. But when I got there, everything looked normal. Nothing was out of place. Then, as I was walking back to my room, I saw this full-sized shadow of a man on the hallway wall. The thing is, the hallway lights are on the ceiling, and normally shadows only fall on the floor, never on the walls. Plus, it was around 11 in the morning, so no lights were on, and the rooms around the hallway don't cast shadows in that spot. It was weird. I went into my room, faced the hallway wall, and just lay down on the bed, and I fell asleep. I woke up about 6 hours later when my mom came back and shook me awake. She'd been ringing the doorbell and calling out, but I didn't respond at all. This was odd because I'm usually a light sleeper. Any little noise would wake me up. The second time was when my dad was out of town, and my mom and sister went out to get groceries. I took an afternoon nap after they left, feeling pretty fresh. I told them I'd answer the door if anyone came, but they still took the keys just in case. After they left, I was reading my favorite book when I heard the doorbell. It was one of our neighbors asking for my dad, and I told him he wasn't home. After he left, I locked both the wired screen door and the wooden door with the key. I started feeling uneasy, and somehow I fell asleep in the living room without realizing it. Hours later, my sister woke me up, telling me that people had been ringing the doorbell, my dad was calling on the landline, and neighbors were shouting my name. The neighbors even had to climb up the balcony, cut the screen door, and let my family in through the house. My parents were really worried about these incidents, even though they happened years apart. They took me to the doctor and ran tests, but there was no explanation. I don't know what to make of it, but these experiences have always stuck with me. Have you ever had something like this happen? It's like your body just decides to shut down completely, even when the world is trying to get your attention. Hey there, I want to share a story from when I was about 13, spending the Christmas holidays at a boarding school that, well, had quite the reputation for being a bit haunted. So my parents were too busy to have me home for the holidays, which was a bummer, but I stayed put. Most of my friends had gone home, so I was pretty much on my own, just reading and trying to rest, since boarding school life was pretty intense with classes 6 days a week and church on Sundays. Only one afternoon off? Yeah, not much downtime at all. Now, the strange things seemed to get bolder when fewer people were around. Only a handful of boys stayed over the break, none from my dorm, which I thought was great at first. The first nights were fine until odd noises started, screams and moaning from the courtyard. I figured it was older boys playing tricks, but it was still unnerving. Then, one morning, I woke up to find all the beds in my dorm pushed to one side except mine. Freaked me out, but again, I thought it was a prank, so I just moved them back. Later, in the shower room, I met this older boy. Let's call him Toby. He was planning a sneaky midnight feast in the kitchen and invited me to join. I'd never broken any rules before, but he seemed confident he'd never been caught, so I said yes. I even dressed in all black to sneak around better. Toby thought I was a bit of a nerd for that, but hey, I wanted to avoid getting caught. We got to the kitchen and started helping ourselves to ice cream, but suddenly, a whole shelf of canned food crashed to the floor, and the kitchen doors slammed shut. We grabbed what we could and ran. On our way back, we heard footsteps, so we hid, but no one appeared. Then, out of nowhere, something grabbed my leg and yanked it. I got up, looked around, no one there. We sprinted away, but Toby got yanked too, falling and hitting his head, giving himself a bloody nose. Luckily, he was tough and got up quickly. We made it back safely and promised not to talk about it. That night, I was too scared to sleep in my dorm. Suddenly, all the beds slammed to the far side of the room again, and I'd had enough. I went to Toby's dorm, told him what happened, and he understood. He let me crash there for the rest of the holidays. The good news? Toby watched out for me while he was there, and we're still in touch today. So yeah, that holiday was a mix of fear, friendship, and a little bit of mystery I'll never forget. Hey, I want to share something deeply personal with you. You know, I've always believed in spirits and the idea that those we've lost might still find ways to reach out. Recently, I had this dream that felt so real, so different from any dream before that I just have to tell you about it. So, let me set the scene. My uncle Eric, well, in the dream, he was sitting there beside my grandma Marie. Both have passed on. Eric back in 2008, and Grandma just a couple of years ago in 2021. I remember Eric was such a strong guy. Even when he was battling a brain tumor, losing parts of himself physically and emotionally, he never really let it get him down. Grandma Marie, she was the heart of our family, and her sudden passing hit us all hard. In the dream, it was like a calm camping spot, the kind of place where my family would gather every summer. I was walking toward these two chairs, and there they were, sitting side by side. I was stunned. I even asked someone, "Can you see them too?" And they said yes. Eric had this peaceful look on his face, so vivid I still can't quite put it into words. He had his arm gently around Grandma's shoulder, and she looked genuinely happy, something I hadn't seen in a long time. They didn't speak, but their presence was so comforting. When I reached out and touched Eric's knee, I realized they looked different from anyone else, like they belonged to another world, but were there just for me. Waking up was a mix of emotions. At first I thought, just a dream. But as the day went on, I felt this profound sense of peace wash over me. I even shared it with another grandmother figure in my life, telling her how it didn't feel like a regular dream, but more like a true visit. You see, after losing Grandma Marie and our beloved Chihuahua, Milo, so suddenly in 2021, I struggled a lot. The grief was overwhelming, especially since Milo's passing was unexpected too. But this dream, this visit, it was like they came to wrap me in a warm hug from beyond, reminding me that I'm not alone and that they're still with me in some way. So, I truly believe that night, Uncle Eric and Grandma Marie stopped by to give me the comfort I desperately needed. And honestly, nothing anyone says can change how real that felt to me. Hey there. I want to share a story that's really close to my heart. Something from when I was just a tiny kid, barely a year and a half old. See, I've always been a bit sensitive to things that most people might call paranormal or unexplainable. To me, it's just part of life, and a big reason why goes back to those earliest memories. My mom used to say she'd watch me through the crack of my bedroom door because I was always talking to someone. This was usually in the mornings before she'd come in to pick me up. She noticed I'd be having these little baby conversations with something in the corner of the room. When she stepped inside, she could feel there was something else there with us, a presence that wasn't scary or harmful at all. In fact, she always described it as a loving energy, like a guardian watching over me. That made her feel safe, and I think it gave her peace knowing I wasn't alone. Sometimes, when she was feeding me in the living room, she'd say I'd suddenly turn my head as if someone had called my name from another room. She could sense that same presence nearby. She told me about all this many times over the years, but I never really shared my own memories until recently. What's really unusual is that I remember being in my crib, clear as day. Most people don't remember things from that young an age, but I do. I'd see these beautiful, swirling patterns of light, kind of like stars moving around me, like a tiny universe unfolding in the dark. It was mesmerizing, and honestly, it helped me drift off to sleep. But sometimes, I'd wake up at night because something would gently touch and tickle my feet. I'd look down, and there'd be a pale, almost translucent hand reaching out, as if to play with me like a kitten or a puppy. The rest of the arm seemed to disappear into the shadows, so I could only see the hand. I never felt scared. Maybe because my mom's feelings about this presence were so comforting, or maybe because I just hadn't learned to be afraid yet. I'd think something like, "I'm sleepy, stop that," in the way a baby might, and the hand would quietly retreat back into the darkness. The soft glow in my room came from the hallway outside, so although the room was mostly dark, I could see the door's outline. I'd look for whoever the hand belonged to, but they were always just out of sight. It felt like there was a kind, protective presence there, watching over me through the night. Recently, my mom told me she never mentioned any of this to my dad before they separated. But before they split, she finally told him about the strange feeling in our old apartment. And you know what? He admitted he felt it too. He said, "Yeah, there was definitely something there." So that's my story. The story of the gentle hand in my crib, a mysterious, tender presence that kept me company when I was just a baby. Whether you call it paranormal or just a loving energy, it shaped how I see the world, full of unseen kindness and wonder, both day and night. Hey there. I want to share with you a story from my childhood that still stays with me. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, but I grew up in Brooklyn. Every summer, though, I'd escape to my grandmother's house tucked away in the mountains of Yauco. It was a place so remote, the roads thinned out into narrow mountain paths where cliffs pressed close to the car, and if another vehicle came by, one of us had to back up until we found a safe spot to pass. It was nerve-wracking, let me tell you. My great-grandfather, whom I called Papi, was a huge part of those summers. He was almost entirely Taino, Puerto Rico's indigenous people, and farmed the land, looked after cows, and shared stories that felt like a bridge to a forgotten time. He spoke about the Taino who hid in the mountains to preserve their way of life, away from the Spanish who, he said, would kill them if they were found. I remember learning from him how to guide a bull by its horns, to ride it, and even a unique whistle that only he could make. That whistle would call animals to him, calm them, or guide them as if by magic. One summer, when Poppy was nearing 100, he was very ill. Our whole family came to see him, neighbors and relatives gathering at the hilltop house he lived in. I was too young to understand what was happening when he passed, so my grandmother sent me down to her house to wait. As dusk fell, the mountains around me grew shadows, and suddenly, the animals of the mountain erupted into cries I had never heard before. Wild dogs howling, pigs screaming like people, cows mourning with a sound so heart-wrenching it reminded me of a scene from a story I'd later hear about loss and grief. I was alone, scared, and hiding inside, peeking out the window. Eventually, the noise faded, and I asked my grandmother why all the animals had been so upset. She told me it was because Poppy's spirit had left us, and the animals, who had known his strength and protection, were mourning. They just knew. That night, restless and curious, I snuck outside near the edge of a cliff. The darkness was thick, and a wild cry echoed close by, freezing me in place. I was too afraid to call out, so I just listened. Then, out of the silence came that unmistakable whistle, Poppy's whistle. Even though I knew he'd passed, I felt him there, deep in the mountain shadows. No one else could make that sound, and it seemed impossible someone was out there, but I believed he was. Yauco is a land rich with history, the home of Aguebana, the great Taino chief, and the birthplace of a rebellion against the Spanish. Many Taino found refuge in those mountains, living quietly, holding on to their traditions. Some say the Taino are long gone, but I know otherwise. Papi, my family and I carry that spirit with us. In some ways, I am still one of them. Hey there, I want to share something deeply personal with you. Something that happened during one of the hardest chapters of my life. Back then, I was going through a lot. My son and I had lost our home because of gentrification, and I had just lost my job. On top of that, a relationship I cared about was falling apart, and the woman I was with wasn't really there for me emotionally. It felt like everything was crumbling around me. Meanwhile, my son's mother was battling her own mental health struggles, so I was the main emotional anchor for my boy. Watching him so unhappy was honestly the toughest part. Every night, I'd lie awake thinking, this has to be what hell feels like. I was so weighed down by it all, I couldn't even cry. I just felt frozen in this heavy sadness. During that time, I started experiencing something strange, sleep paralysis. I'd wake up halfway through the night, completely unable to move. I was sleeping in our cramped living room because that's all I could afford. Even though I could see the room clearly, I wasn't fully awake. It was like being caught between sleep and reality. And in those moments, I'd sense this presence in the room. It wasn't human, that's for sure. It felt like a dark, swirling mist with a vague shape that slowly moved toward me. It came with this overwhelming feeling of dread, like it was feeding off my fear. I've been through a lot in life, believe me. Growing up in Brooklyn, I've faced some tough people and tough situations. Now, as a social worker, I help others who've been through their own battles. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for this. It was like this force was from another dimension, a place I only glimpsed during those twilight moments between sleep and wakefulness. I fought every time, trying to either fully wake up or drift back to sleep. But it was like being stuck in a dangerous in-between where that presence had power over me. My whole body would shake with terror until I finally jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat, knowing I'd just been face to face with something truly real, but beyond this world. What helped me turn the tide was the same thing that helped me rebuild my life. I started searching for work again, went back to school, and began family therapy. Slowly, hope returned. I also started exploring my spiritual beliefs more deeply, tuning into a lifelong inner voice that reminded me of my capacity for unconditional love, both for myself and others. This fear, I realized, was something external, an illusion I allowed inside. But when I centered myself, stayed calm, and trusted my own strength, I could face it. Then, one night, when that dark presence came again, I did something different. Even while still caught in that half-awake state, I found the strength to stand up, at least in spirit. I didn't back down. It came closer, stronger than ever, but I moved toward it with courage. It was like that exhilarating moment when you watch something epic unfold, goosebumps and all. Without words, just with pure will, I sent it a message. Get out of here. You don't belong. And just like that, it left. I woke up fully or drifted off peacefully. It didn't matter anymore. It tried once or twice more, and I stood my ground every time. It's been years since then. My life has changed so much. We have a nice apartment now. I'm finishing up school. My son is about to graduate high school, and our family is closer than ever. Just a few days ago, I caught a glimpse of that presence again, small and harmless this time. I laughed, walked right up to it, and told it to go away. And it did, just like shooing away a pesky mosquito. Thanks for listening. If you ever want to talk more about this or have questions, I'm here. Hey there. I want to share a pretty strange experience my girlfriend and I had during a camping trip in the Smoky Mountains. For her birthday, I took her to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, which is this bustling little town right by the mountains. We decided to camp our first night out at Elkmont Campground, a really popular spot surrounded by tall trees that reminded me a bit of baby redwoods, and a clear river with rocks scattered all over. There were families around, kids running about. It felt like a perfect little nature escape. We borrowed a tent, but realized we forgot the stakes, so we headed back into town at dusk to grab some supplies: whiskey, hot dogs, and of course, tent stakes. When we got back, most campers were winding down their fires or packing up for the night. Our tent was still up but kind of scrunched since it wasn't properly staked. We fixed it and started a fire to get cozy. A couple hours later, around midnight, we were sitting by the campfire. The campground is pretty tight-knit. Campsites are only about 30 yards apart. Bears are known to wander around, so my girlfriend was a bit nervous. That's why I picked a spot right in the center of the campground for some peace of mind. Almost everyone else had gone to sleep, and all we could hear was the soft crackling of the fire and the gentle flow of the river nearby. The moon was just a thin crescent behind clouds, so it was pretty dark. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a light appeared from the campsite just behind my girlfriend and a little to my left. It was shining straight at us, then darting around like it was searching for something. Kind of like the Eye of Sauron, if you can picture that. We saw the silhouette of a man wearing a headlamp, but his movements were so odd, almost like a weird kind of walk, kind of how Jar Jar Binks moves in Star Wars, if that makes sense. Whenever I glanced at him, he'd immediately flash his light at us. He kept shining the light on his picnic table, barely moving his hands, then stepping back to his tent to shine the light there, then back to the table, then at us again, repeating this over and over for nearly an hour. At first, I thought maybe he was just searching for something, but his behavior was just so strange and repetitive, it felt off. Eventually, when his light stayed on us too long, I shined my flashlight back at him for a while. And that's when things got really creepy. A chill ran down my spine as I watched his outline vanish right before my eyes. The light from his headlamp dropped to the ground and then seemed to move across the ground by itself, almost like it was running or crawling into the bushes diagonally between our campsites. I took my flashlight away and saw the light slowly come back out of the bushes, rising back up to the height of a person. Then the shadowy figure appeared again, walking out and returning to his strange routine, all without making a single sound. Later, we went into our tent to sleep, but the figure kept up his odd behavior through the night. The next morning, we looked over to that campsite and there was no sign anyone had been there. No tent. Nothing. It was like the place had been deserted without a trace. Afterward, I learned there's a small town just a mile away called Elkmont Ghost Town, with abandoned buildings and even a cemetery up a nearby trail. I haven't found any other stories about this mysterious headlamp man, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if others have had similar eerie encounters. Hey, I want to share some personal experiences that have been a part of my life since I was a little kid. I'm now 27, and ever since I was about 7 years old, I've encountered things that most people would call paranormal. It all began when my older sister and her friends were messing around with an Ouija board. They were around 11 or 12, and I was just a curious 7-year-old. My grandmother once told me that because I was the youngest and most innocent, something kind of attached itself to me that day. I have lots of stories, but I'll stick to a few shorter ones unless you want to hear more. One time, my mom saw this black figure crawling down the hallway on all fours, almost like a twisted person with dislocated joints. It was wearing one of my Halloween masks, a skull with horns. When my mom turned to look at it, it vanished. She actually screamed my name, thinking I was playing a prank. When she saw me peek out from the living room, her face went pale. She made me find that same mask and insisted it be taken out of the house right away. Another story involves my grandmother waking up multiple nights to see a little boy in an old-fashioned sailor suit from the early 1800s. His skin was pale and had this eerie dark blue-black coloring around his eyes and lips. It was unsettling for her, but she never knew who he was. Once, I was playing with my dog, throwing a blanket over my head and letting him pull it off. Suddenly, he started whimpering and seemed scared. Before I could figure out what was wrong, I heard a deep, raspy male voice breathe heavily right into my ear and then exhale. My dog went into a frenzy, barking wildly. There was also this one morning, around 5:30 a.m., when I woke up because someone whispered my name into my ear. It was a male voice that sounded a lot like my husband, or maybe my brother, but both were miles away at the time. After that, my usually aloof orange cat jumped up on my pillow and stayed close, while my other two cats just stared from the doorway, refusing to come in. It freaked me out, especially since I'm 9 months pregnant and usually pretty tuned in to what's real and what isn't. This felt different. One night, I was driving home early in the morning, around 3 a.m., and everything was eerily silent in the city, like nature had gone quiet before a storm. I saw a jogger waiting to cross the street, but as I turned to drive away, he stepped into the road and started twisting his body in unnatural ways, almost like his bones were breaking. He sprinted at my car with huge predatory eyes and a terrifying mouth. I floored it and didn't look back until I was safely home. When I finally did, he was just standing there, watching me go. These experiences have shaped how I see the world. It's strange living with these moments that don't fit into everyday explanations, but they've become a part of my story, and maybe they'll be a part of yours now too. I grew up in a house with a strange little secret built into it. The upstairs walls were not really solid in the way you would expect. Behind most of them, there were crawl spaces that ran along the upper floor and even connected down toward the basement. When I was little, my brother, my sister, and I thought that was the greatest thing in the world. We would squeeze into those narrow spaces with flashlights, blankets, and snacks, building little forts inside the walls like we had discovered some hidden kingdom. It was filthy in there. Dust everywhere, spiders in the corners, old insulation that made our skin itch and left tiny fiberglass scratches on our arms. But when you are a kid, things like that do not matter much. To us, it was adventure. My mom knew we played in there, and she never seemed too worried about it. By the time I was a teenager, though, my siblings had both moved out. It was just me and my mom in the house, and I had long since stopped crawling around inside the walls. That part of my childhood felt packed away, like old toys in a box. Then one night, I was sitting on the couch in the living room watching TV when I heard something shift behind the wall. At first, I barely reacted. Houses make noises, you know? Pipes knock, wood settles, old floors complain for no reason. So when the sound stopped, I just went back to watching my show. But then it happened again. And again. Not every minute, not loudly enough to make me panic, but often enough that I started noticing. A soft scrape behind the wall. A creak from somewhere inside the crawl space. A dull little bump that seemed to come from above us, then beside us. My mom heard it too. At first we joked that we had a ghost. It was easier to laugh than to admit how unsettling it felt. But over time, the noises became harder to explain, and the joke started to feel less funny. One night, my mom and I were both in the living room when there was a heavy thud from inside the wall. Not a creak, not a pipe, a thud. We both froze and looked at each other. I remember her face so clearly, like she was silently asking me, "You heard that too, right?" She got up, walked over to the wall, and gave it one quick knock. A few seconds later, something knocked back. Only it was not a polite little tap. It was a hard bang from the other side. My mom and I screamed and ran straight out of the house into the front yard. We stood there in the grass, shaking, staring back at the windows like the house itself had turned its head toward us. After that, we were convinced it was haunted. We sprayed holy water around the rooms. My mom prayed out loud. I even remember us asking whatever it was to leave us alone or speak or give us some kind of sign. Nothing answered. But the noises kept happening. The walls still shifted. We still heard knocks. And then things started disappearing. At first, it was small. My mom lost her keys one morning and searched for nearly 2 hours before finding them outside in the yard. Then some of my makeup vanished. Food went missing faster than it should have. Sometimes we would come home and find cabinet doors hanging open, drawers pulled out. Things moved just enough to make your stomach sink. After about 6 months, we were both terrified. I usually slept alone, but one night I just could not do it. Something about my room felt wrong. I kept staring at my closet, feeling like something was staring back from the darkness. At that age, I wanted so badly to be brave. I wanted to be the kind of girl who could roll her eyes at fear and sleep with the lights off. But I was not brave that night. I was scared in a way that felt deep and childish and humiliating. So I ran to my mom's room and slept beside her. That feeling of being watched stayed with me for weeks. Then everything finally came out. I was not home when it happened, and honestly, I am thankful for that. My mom came home early from work one afternoon because she was not feeling well. When she got upstairs, she heard movement coming from my bedroom. She opened my door and saw a man sitting on my bed. A thin, dirty, scraggly-looking man, just sitting there like he belonged there. He looked up at her and smiled. My mom ran out of the house and called the police. What they told us afterward was worse than any ghost story we had made up in our heads. That man had been living inside our walls for months. He had been using the crawl spaces to move around the house. He had been coming out when we were gone, taking food, stealing small things, opening cabinets, going through drawers. Every scrape I heard behind the wall, every thud, every strange knock, Every time I felt like someone was watching me, it was him. And the part that still makes my skin go cold is this. The only entrance to the crawl space was in my closet. So all those nights I lay there staring at that door, feeling like something was on the other side, I was right. Hi, I'm Jay, and I'm giving full permission for my name and story to be shared. I don't really know why I've been so nervous about sending this in. I've thought about it so many times, and then I'd stop myself. But I think I'm finally ready to just take a breath and tell it. Before I get into what happened that night, I do need to give a content warning because this story is tied to something very painful from my childhood. When I was 10, my best friend lived just a couple houses down from me. Her name was Marin, and she was only 8. She was murdered by her stepfather, along with her mother and baby sister, before he took his own life. It was horrific, and it changed everything. My neighborhood never felt the same after that. Honestly, the energy there had always been strange, and that was not the only tragedy connected to the area, but that is a whole other story. The important thing is that I still live in the same house I grew up in. I've been here for about 25 years, and that house where everything happened is still only 2 doors away. My backyard is pretty large, and it is fully fenced in with a privacy fence. There are 2 regular gates on one side, both with secure latches that can only be opened from inside the yard. Then there is a larger double-door entrance, the kind you could use to bring something big into the yard. That one locks with a metal post that drops into the ground, plus a lock, and again, it is all secured from the inside. At the time, my girlfriend, who is now my fiancée, and I were sleeping in our old bedroom on the first floor. One window faced the backyard, and the other faced that double-door gate. That second window was right behind the head of our bed, which still gives me chills thinking about it. One night, it was probably close to 1 in the morning, and we were trying to fall asleep when we heard this strange fiddling sound outside. Then suddenly, there was a loud bang, exactly like those double doors had been swung open. We both froze. Then we shot up, because there was no reason anyone should have been opening that gate in the middle of the night. And again, the way it was locked, someone should not have been able to open it from outside the yard. I was terrified someone was trying to break in, so I slowly peeked through the window behind us, the one facing the double doors. Nothing. The doors were closed. But I know what I heard. We both heard it. It was the sound of those doors, even the creak of them. So now I'm panicking a little, and I get up to check the other window, the one facing the rest of the yard. And that's when I saw him. It looked like the full black silhouette of a man walking through my backyard. No face, no features, no clothes I could make out, just a solid, dark shape moving across the yard. Then he faded away. Not ran, not ducked behind something. He just disappeared, like he walked straight into nothing. I don't know how to explain what came over me, but I felt this horrible certainty in my body. I felt like it was him, the man who killed my friend. I know that sounds like a huge thing to say, and at the time I didn't have proof. My neighborhood is full of strange activity, and honestly, it could have been so many things. But something in me knew. It was the fear, the anger, the heaviness of it. I just knew. Nothing else happened that night. My fiancé calmed me down, and eventually I went back to bed. But the next morning is when it got even stranger. For a little bit of background, I used to have a small online following. Nothing huge, but enough that I didn't always use my real name online, just to be careful. So a lot of friends I made through social media knew me by my internet name. Some of them did know my real name, but they still mostly used the name they met me with, and I never minded. One of those friends, someone I talked to every day at the time, is very spiritually sensitive. That morning, they texted me like usual to say good morning. I had not told them anything about what happened the night before. But then they said they had a really strange dream. They told me there was a young girl with brown hair, and she kept repeating the same thing over and over. "Tell Jay it's okay. Tell Jay everything is okay." My heart just stopped. My friend was confused because they didn't know who Jay was, or they thought maybe the name meant something else. And I had to remind them that Jay is my real name. The second I said that, it felt like we both understood. They knew about what happened to my childhood friend because it is still a big part of my life, even now as an adult. So I told them about the gate, the sound, the figure in the yard, and that awful feeling I had. We came to two possible conclusions. Either it was not him, and Marin knew I was scared and wanted me to know I was safe, or it was him, and she protected me from whatever he was, or whatever energy came with him that night. For whatever reason, she never seems to come directly to me. She always finds another way, and that actually has a pattern. Back when everything happened, on that last day, we had spent the whole day together. We rode bikes, made little bracelets, and my dad even cooked dinner so she could eat with us. Afterwards, she went home, and later that night, everything unfolded in the most tragic way. The night after it happened, my dad had a dream about her. In the dream, she came to him and said, "Thank you for dinner, and thank you for letting me be friends with your daughter." That has stayed with me my entire life. So that's my story. I know it's a sad one, but to me, there is something soft at the center of it too. Something that feels like love still reaching through, even after all this time. Thank you for listening, and thank you for giving me a place to share it. I have so many more stories about her, my neighborhood, and even a haunted museum I used to work at. I'll definitely share more when I'm ready. I've been turning this over in my head for months now. It happened a little over 5 months ago, but I think I'm only just starting to understand how strange it really was. So, for a bit of background, my younger brother and I live with our grandmother. My mom and dad have their own places nearby. They're not together anymore, but they've always had this quiet, friendly kind of partnership. They still check in on each other, still spend time together sometimes. Nothing dramatic there. But near the end of winter, I started having these dreams. At first, they were just unsettling. I kept finding myself in this empty town packed with traffic. Cars were moving, engines were growling, horns were blaring. Everything felt alive with noise. Except there were no people. Not one. No drivers, no pedestrians, nobody standing in windows. Just this city moving by itself. I'd wake up every night with this awful dread sitting in my chest. It wasn't just fear. It felt more urgent than that. Like there was something I needed to do, something important, but my brain wouldn't let me see what it was. Then the dreams got worse. By the second week, the town looked ruined. Cars were smashed into each other. Some were burning. The streets looked warped and wrong, almost dreamlike in the worst way. And then my dad started showing up. Every night after that, something terrible happened to him. It was never the same thing twice. One night it was a phone call from a hospital. Another night it was a flood. Then a storm. Then a crash. Sometimes it was something completely surreal, but it always came back to the same thing. Me, my dad, and this horrible feeling that I was too late. I'm anxious in everyday life, sure, but my dreams had always been kind of a safe place for me. I almost never had nightmares. So when this kept happening, night after night, it really started wearing me down. I was sleeping badly, waking up sore, snapping at little things. Around the same time, my mom started saying she wasn't sleeping well either, but I didn't really ask why. By the end of the third week, I finally booked an appointment with my therapist. I figured maybe stress was bubbling up in some strange way, and my brain had decided to turn it into a horror movie. I hadn't told anyone in my family about the dreams. I didn't want to scare them. So I went to the appointment, sat down, and started explaining everything. The empty city, the cars, the feeling, my dad appearing over and over. And right in the middle of that session, this wave of pure panic hit me. Nothing had happened. There was no sound, no message, no reason for it. But suddenly I knew, in this deep and terrible way, that I needed to go home immediately. I couldn't sit there anymore. I apologized, left about 10 minutes early, and practically ran to the bus stop. While I was waiting, I texted my dad and told him I wanted to see him that day. That was unusual for me. I don't really text him like that. Usually I just call or walk into his apartment because I have a key. We didn't have plans. I figured he was probably out somewhere playing chess, like he usually did on certain afternoons. I got on the bus and tried calling him a couple of times. No answer. At first, I told myself that was normal. He might have been busy. He might have left his phone in his coat. He might have been in the middle of a game. Then my mom called. She told me she had left work early because she suddenly felt like she needed to check on him. That made me pause. My mom never leaves work early unless something is really wrong. But still, I tried to calm myself down. I told myself we were both just anxious. I told myself it was nothing. About half an hour later, I got back to my grandmother's place to drop off my things before going to my dad's apartment. And at almost the exact same moment, my mom walked in too. She looked shaken. Her face was tight, and I could tell she had been crying. That's when she told us my dad had suffered a stroke. It had happened while I was on the bus and while she was leaving work. Somehow, both of us had felt that same panic at almost the same time. She got to him first because she was closer. She found him, called the ambulance, and then came straight to my grandmother's house to tell us. We sat in the kitchen afterward, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of it. Then my mom told me something that honestly made my skin go cold. She had been having the same dreams. Not exactly the same scenes, but the same pattern. The first week, just strange and uncomfortable. The second week, darker and more frightening. The third week, my dad started appearing in them. She had been waking up scared too. She had been losing sleep too. Neither of us had told the other. And then, on the day I finally said the dreams out loud to someone, everything happened. My dad had no known health problems. He was healthy, active, stubborn in the way dads can be. He had never given us a reason to think something like this was coming. And neither my mom nor I had any normal reason to go to his apartment at that exact time. But somehow, from two different parts of town, we both got pulled toward him. Because my mom arrived when she did, he got medical help quickly. He recovered far better than anyone expected, and I still think about how different things could have been if she had ignored that feeling. I don't know what I believe now. I've always been skeptical about paranormal things. I like explanations. I like logic. I like when the world keeps its furniture where it belongs. But I don't have an explanation for this. I don't know why we had those dreams. I don't know why they grew worse in the same way. I don't know why both of us felt that sudden terror at the same time. The only thing I can say is that something, somehow, got us moving. And honestly, knowing my dad, I wouldn't be surprised if his guardian angel has the same ridiculous sense of humor he does. Maybe it knew the only way to get our attention was to rattle every window in our heads until we finally came running. I remembered this today out of nowhere, and honestly, it still makes my skin go cold when I think about it. My family has always been very Catholic, and during the early part of the pandemic, our parish started doing continuous adoration in front of the Blessed Sacrament. Families could sign up for an hour just to pray, reflect, or sit quietly in the chapel. My parents took the 3 to 4 p.m. slot, but a lot of the time, they would ask either my younger sister or me to go in their place. Sometimes, the two of us went together. That afternoon, we got ready like we usually did. I took my rosary and one of my mom's old prayer books, and before going to the church, we stopped at a small store to buy a candle and a box of matches. The church was close to our house, so we arrived just as our hour was starting. When we walked in, I noticed right away that the person before us had already left. My sister went over to write our names in the attendance log, and I stepped into the chapel. And that was when it began. All of a sudden, I felt this sharp, burning pain across my back. At first, I tried to brush it off. I lit the candle, made the sign of the cross, and sat down. But the pain kept getting stronger. It honestly felt like my skin was burning. After a few minutes, I couldn't ignore it anymore, so I leaned toward my sister and whispered, "Something's wrong. My back hurts really badly. Can you look?" I wasn't expecting her to find anything. I had taken a shower before we left, and there had been nothing there. No rash, no cuts, no marks. My sister lifted the back of my shirt, and her face changed immediately. She just stared. I said, "What? What is it?" She looked frightened. Then she said, "Your back is covered in scratches." I gave this nervous little laugh because I thought she had to be messing with me. I said, "Don't joke like that." But she shook her head and said, "I'm not joking." Then she went even quieter, and she whispered, "More are showing up." That's when I completely froze. I said, "What do you mean more are showing up?" She told me that thin red scratches were appearing across my back while she was looking at them. She said they hadn't been there seconds before. At that point, I was terrified. I could feel myself getting emotional, but we didn't want to leave the Blessed Sacrament unattended. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I started praying the rosary. My sister prayed the responses with me, and we stayed there for the whole hour. But the burning did not stop. Not once. When the next person finally came in for their shift, we finished the prayers and left as quickly as we could. By then, my back felt raw, like it was still on fire. The walk home felt much longer than it really was. As soon as we got inside, we told my parents everything. My mother checked my back herself and cleaned the scratches. To this day, I still don't have an explanation for what happened in that chapel. But I know this much. After that afternoon, my parents never sent me there by myself again. From then on, someone always went with me. And sometimes, when I think about that quiet chapel, that empty hour, and those scratches appearing out of nowhere, I still wonder what was really in there with us. I was pretty young when this happened. I'd say elementary school age, though I honestly couldn't tell you exactly how old I was. It's been too long. I just know I was old enough to understand that something strange had happened, but still young enough that the dark felt enormous. Back then, I had a lot of trouble at night. I had night terrors, the kind where I'd wake up screaming so loudly my family would talk about it the next day. I also sleepwalked. Not once or twice either. It happened enough that my parents would joke, sometimes not fully joking, that they might need to tie me to the bed just to keep me safe. I was that kid who would suddenly appear beside someone's bed in the middle of the night, just standing there. Of course, they'd wake up terrified, and then I'd wake up terrified too, because I had no idea how I'd gotten there or why someone was yelling. One winter, I sleepwalked through the sliding door and ended up on the enclosed porch. It wasn't heated, and I curled up out there and fell asleep. My mom found me in the morning, freezing cold. Another time, at my dad's house, I shared an upstairs room with my sister. My stepmom woke up to banging on the window and came in to find me trying to open it. She panicked and asked what I was doing because I could have fallen out. Apparently, I told her, very calmly, that I was just trying to get a drink of water from the kitchen. So yes, my family had reasons to worry. The thing is, I never remembered sleepwalking unless someone woke me up in the middle of it. And when that happened, I was confused, frightened, and hard to calm down. But this night was different. It was summer at my mom's house, which was my main home. I remember the season clearly because we didn't use the air conditioning until it got unbearably hot. Instead, we'd open the windows and turn on the attic fan. That fan had this strong, steady pull to it, like the whole house was breathing. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up because I heard voices. No one should have been awake. My mom and stepdad were strict about bedtime, and once the lights were out, that meant everyone was done for the night. And that night, every light in the house was off. But I could hear talking. It was muffled, not clear enough to make out words, but definitely voices. Low, steady voices. At that age, I was terrified of getting out of bed at night. I'd hold my bladder until morning, no matter how badly I needed the bathroom, just because walking through the dark felt impossible. If I ever did get up, I would turn on the hall light immediately. But that night, I didn't. I just felt curious. The voices sounded close, almost like they were pulling my attention down the hallway. I got out of bed and walked toward them without even thinking about the light. At the end of the hallway, you could turn left into the dining room or right toward the front door. The attic fan was right above that spot, and when I reached it, I remember the air moving over my arms. It raised the hair on my skin, but not in a scary way. It actually felt good because the house was so warm. I stopped there and asked myself, am I dreaming? And I decided I wasn't. I could feel the carpet under my feet. I could touch the wall beside me. I could feel the fan moving air across my skin. Everything felt solid and normal. Nothing had that strange, slippery feeling dreams sometimes have. Because it was summer, the front door was open, but the screen door was shut and locked. Sometimes my parents left the porch light on, probably to make the porch seem less inviting to anyone outside. So when I turned toward the door, I could see through it clearly. And that's when I realized the voices were coming from the porch. I still wasn't scared. That's the strangest part to me even now. I was a child who was scared of everything at night, but in that moment, I felt completely calm. I thought maybe my mom was outside talking to a neighbor, or maybe two neighbors were talking. Mostly, I remember feeling like I had stumbled onto something I wasn't included in, and I wanted to know what it was. So I walked closer. The voices got a little louder, still muffled, still impossible to understand, but they sounded like a calm conversation. I was sure that when I opened the door, I'd see someone sitting right there on the porch. I opened the screen door, and there, standing on the porch, were two small gray figures. They looked like what people would call aliens. Small bodies, gray skin, the whole thing. They weren't hiding. They didn't jump or run. It felt more like I had interrupted a conversation they already knew I was going to interrupt. We looked at each other for maybe 1 or 2 seconds. And then they were gone. I don't know if they vanished. I don't know if I blinked or looked away and then looked back. I only know that one moment they were there, and the next moment they weren't. And still, I felt calm, not frozen, not screaming, not panicked, just peaceful. I shut the screen door, turned around, and walked back down the hallway. I remember the attic fan touching my skin again as I passed under it, and I remember telling myself, once more, that I was awake. Then I got back into bed and fell asleep. The next morning, I was sitting at the table while my mom made breakfast. She asked me how I slept, and all at once, the whole memory came rushing back. It didn't feel like remembering a dream. You know how sometimes you start telling someone about a dream, and halfway through, you realize parts of it don't make sense? This wasn't like that. It felt as real as remembering what I had done the day before. I said, "Mom, I don't think you're going to believe me, but I woke up last night, and there were aliens talking outside on the porch." I told her everything. The voices, the hallway, the fan, the screen door, the two gray figures. I was excited, honestly. I thought maybe she'd know what it meant, or at least help me understand why they had been there. But she just looked at me strangely. Then she told me, very carefully, that I must have had a realistic dream. I told her it wasn't a dream. I knew it wasn't. She said again that it had to be, and I remember feeling so disappointed. I don't blame her. I know how it sounded. But something about her brushing it off made me feel like I couldn't tell her things like that anymore. We never talked about it again, but I still remember it clearly. I'm almost 40 now, and it's still one of the sharpest memories from my childhood. I still think about it all the time and wonder what, exactly, I saw on that porch. I've told this story to a handful of people over the years, but I've always wanted to put it into words for someone who might understand it, or maybe someone who has experienced something close to it. So I'll start where it really began, sometime around 2020. Back then, I was living with my mom and my girlfriend, and I was near the end of my senior year of high school. It was the COVID year, so everything felt strange already. School got cut short, time blurred together, and honestly, my friends and I were smoking a lot back then, so some of the smaller details are a little foggy. My grandma had always been deeply into ghost stories, but not in a casual way. She genuinely believed there was something in her house. She called it a shadow man. She used to tell me it helped my blind grandpa find his chewing tobacco and things like that, almost like it was just another strange presence in the house. My uncle, though, had a very different feeling about it. He stayed there for a while after his house burned down, and he said he heard what sounded like children running up and down the hallway. He also claimed he heard voices, and even said he had recordings. At the time, I was young, and I didn't really believe much of it. Then my grandma had to go in for open-heart surgery. Several doctors had turned her down because the odds were so risky. I remember hearing she had around an 80% chance of making it, and even that felt terrifying. Eventually, some surgeons in St. Louis agreed to do it, so my grandparents went there and stayed for quite a while. My brother, who I'll call Zane, was already living at their place, so he stayed behind to take care of the house and the dogs. One day, my friend, who I'll call Devin, and I went out there to visit him. We brought a 12-pack of Diet Coke and a little weed, and the three of us sat in the back room, talking and smoking. My grandma's house was way out in the middle of nowhere. There were neighbors, technically, but they were spread far apart. It was the kind of place where silence had room to stretch. I don't remember what we were talking about exactly, but I remember what interrupted us. From the other end of the house, we heard yelling. Not normal yelling. It was muffled, but loud, and it sounded distressed. The words were all tangled together, like someone speaking through a wall in a language I couldn't recognize. It didn't sound human in the way you expect a voice to sound human. The house wasn't huge, maybe around 1,500 square feet, so it wasn't like the sound was far away. It felt close enough to make all three of us stop. After that, we started talking about the shadow man. I tried to convince myself the sound had come from outside, but deep down, I knew something about it felt wrong. Devin and I left later, and I tried not to think about it too much. But that night, when I got home, I was lying in bed with my girlfriend, and I heard the same sound again. The exact same garbled yelling. Only this time, it was in my own house, almost 45 minutes away from my grandma's. It was late, everything was quiet, and both of us heard it. That was the moment things stopped feeling like a weird story and started feeling like something had followed me. After that, life got strange for a few years. At first, it was small things, knocking at the door at 2 or 3 in the morning, but nobody would be there. It was always 3 knocks, every time. That detail still bothers me. One night, 2 friends of mine, who I'll call Cole and Wade, were in my room playing Clone Hero with me. We heard a knock at the door. I had already told Cole about the Shadow Man, but he didn't believe it. He laughed and said it had to be Devin messing with me. So he ran to check. Nobody was there. He still brings that up sometimes. There were voices too. Little "hey" and "hello" sounds right in your ear. Then there was the TV in the game room. Sometimes I'd hear it turn on by itself, play for a few minutes, and then shut off. I never got brave enough to fully investigate it. I couldn't tell if it was actually the TV or something pretending to be one. I could hear noise, but I could never make out exactly what was being said. One time, Devin was watching my webcam while we were talking online, and he told me he saw my girlfriend walk past in the background. But she wasn't home. She was at work. I knew that for a fact because I had just gone through her line at work, gotten food, and come straight back home. The thing that scared me the most in that house happened while I was home alone. I was sitting in the game room with the door open, playing CS:GO with Wade. The bedrooms had carpet, but the rest of the place had stained concrete floors. All of a sudden, from the far side of the house, I heard what sounded like someone in socks sliding quickly across the floor. Fast little movements, almost like a child running. It came closer and closer, all the way up to my doorway. Then it stopped. There was silence. And then, clear as day, right there in the doorway, I heard a human finger snap. That was the first time I remember shaking so badly I couldn't even explain what happened. Wade was still talking to me through the mic, and I just sat there frozen. After that, snapping became regular. That and the 3 knocks. Those were its calling cards. It got to where I couldn't sleep unless the TV was blaring loud enough to cover the sounds. My mom heard things too, but she handled it differently. She'd say, "We have to live here, so I just ignore it." One time, I was terrified, and she casually told me that just minutes earlier, someone on the couch had said hello to her, even though nobody was there. She just brushed it off. My mom is tougher than me. I ran out of that house more than once. Eventually, rent went up, and we decided to move. We bought an old single-wide trailer for cheap and put it on some property my mom had near my grandma's place. I really hoped we had left everything behind. We hadn't. The first night in that trailer, my girlfriend, who I'll call Eliza, and I were getting settled in. My brother Zane was there too, and my mom was over at my grandparents' house. Eliza and I were walking near the front door when the front and back doors swung open at the exact same time. Then all the breakers flipped. At the same moment, there was this awful moaning sound. I called my mom, scared out of my mind. I don't remember exactly what she said, but knowing her, it was probably something like, "Flip the breakers back on and ignore it." Honestly, that might have been the best advice anyone could give, even if it didn't make me feel better. In that trailer, things got worse. There was a sound that happened over and over at night, like someone dropping a marble on the floor in the back of the trailer. It would hit, bounce faster and faster, then stop. Then it would happen again. I never found a marble or anything that could explain it. The whispering got worse too. Mostly greeting words. Always soft, always close to my ear. For a while, I would wake up every morning around 4:30. I don't know if that meant something, but it happened enough that I noticed. I started looking for help and even contacted a few churches, but nothing ever really came of it. Devin stopped coming over much after things started getting thrown near him. When he did visit, he'd sometimes sleep in his car instead of inside. He told me about objects moving in the house and even in the shop building on the property. It also liked knocking on the window by my computer. I know there are more things I'm forgetting, which is part of why I wanted to finally write this down. That trailer was the worst period of it, and I'm honestly grateful my memory has softened some of it. The last truly terrifying thing happened years later, after my grandma passed away in the hospital. My mom had been staying with her and wanted to go home that night. I offered to stay with Zane and my grandpa at their house. Zane and I had gone out back to smoke in this little building they called the back house. Later, we came inside and stopped in the kitchen to get a drink. While we were standing there, knocks exploded through the house. Every wall, every ceiling, every surface. It sounded like 30 people knocking at the same time, and every knock came in threes. I cried. I can laugh about that now, but in the moment, it was horrible. There was still some activity after that, but nothing as intense. Over the next couple of years, it slowly faded. Now it's been about 3 years since anything has happened. Eliza and I live in a new place, and nothing has followed us here. I hope it stays that way. But I want to say clearly that this really happened. I know how it sounds. I know some people won't believe it. That's okay. I'm sharing it because it changed the way I think about things, and because a part of me is still curious. If anyone has experienced something similar, especially the 3 knocks, the snapping, or that strange garbled yelling, I'd honestly love to know. This whole thing left me with questions I think I'll carry for the rest of my life. I'm new here, so I hope it's okay if I share something that's been sitting in the back of my mind for a while. About 5 years ago, I started looking into EVP, electronic voice phenomena. At first, I thought it would just be strange recordings, faint whispers, little oddities you can explain away if you try hard enough. But the deeper I went, the more I felt like there were layers to this world that most of us never get told about. One theory that really caught my attention is sometimes called the UFO intrusion theory. The idea is that UFOs and ghosts may not be separate things at all. They could be the same phenomenon, beings from another dimension that have been close to us for thousands of years. And according to this theory, they are not physical in the way we are. They are more like energetic beings. Just like we need food from plants and animals to keep going, they might need energy from us. Not food exactly, but emotional and electrical energy. Brainwaves, fear, joy, awe, prayer, panic, euphoria. That's the part that made me think of Monsters, Inc. Not in a childish way, but in the sense that fear, emotion, and human intensity become a kind of fuel. The theory suggests these beings cross into our reality and appear in ways we can barely understand. Lights in the sky, strange shapes in rooms, cold spots, voices, knocks, shadows, orbs. They create fear, confusion, wonder, and sometimes even happiness, then somehow absorb the energy we produce in those moments. Think about a packed church, everyone praying with deep emotion, or a stadium full of people shouting, celebrating, almost vibrating together, or a concert where thousands of minds are locked into the same feeling. The theory says those moments might produce exactly the kind of energy these beings are drawn to. There are people who point to infrared photos as possible evidence, beams, strange lights, or round glowing shapes near people's heads during religious gatherings, sports events, concerts, and other emotional crowds. Of course, some of these photos could have normal explanations: dust, reflections, camera artifacts. But once you start looking at enough of them, the pattern begins to feel harder to ignore. And then there's religion and folklore. Gods, saints, elves, genies, spirits, angels, demons. Maybe these were never entirely separate categories. Maybe they were different names, from different cultures, for the same visitors pressing their faces against the glass of our world. Even animals seem to notice something, cats especially. Anyone who lives with cats has probably seen it. They stare at empty corners, follow something invisible with their eyes, suddenly hiss at nothing. Sometimes they act like they are tracking a presence we simply cannot sense. In one case I studied, there was a house where a young girl and a teenage boy seemed to appear. We had a photograph and several EVP recordings. In the recordings, they seemed to suggest they had once lived there, that they had drowned, and even gave names. After some digging, the details seemed to place the story somewhere around the early 1960s. But under this theory, they may not have been ghost children at all. They may have been interdimensional beings using the memory of the house, like reaching into an old wound and making it speak. They could have accessed something traumatic that lingered there, then shaped it into voices, images, and emotions. Not necessarily to communicate with us, but to affect us, to unsettle us, to pull energy from our reactions. That idea sounds wild at first, I know it does. But the more I read, the more I listened, and the more I compared different cases, the less impossible it felt. Places with heavy histories seem to attract this kind of activity again and again, almost as though memory itself becomes a doorway. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I don't. Maybe some of this can be explained naturally. Maybe some of it can't. But I do think there's something here worth looking at with an open mind. So I wanted to ask, what do you think? Have you ever experienced something that made you wonder whether ghosts, UFOs, and old folklore might all be different masks worn by the same thing? Ever since I was little, I've had the feeling that something has been following me through life. I know that sounds strange. I don't really know how else to explain it. For a long time, it didn't feel evil. It was unsettling, yes, but not hateful. Not at first. When I was growing up, my sister and I lived in a house that already felt heavy. Our family situation was abusive, and there was so much fear and anger in that home that it almost felt baked into the walls. Strange things happened all the time. We saw shadow figures. We heard whispers when nobody was there. Sometimes we heard screams. And there was something else too. Something that looked like my sister. Almost like her. But not quite. It moved like her, stood like her, had her shape, but something about it was wrong in a way I could feel before I could explain. That's probably a whole other story on its own. The more my sister and I talked about what we were experiencing, the worse it seemed to get. Looking back now, I honestly wonder if whatever it was had been feeding off the fear and the pain in that house. There was plenty of both. Eventually, I moved out. I was only 17, and I ended up living alone in an old farmhouse outside of town. It was way down this rough dirt road, far from neighbors, far from everything. The house was in terrible condition and probably should have been condemned, but I was desperate to get out of the situation I was in. The deal was simple: no rent, just somewhere to sleep. At first, I told myself the house was just old. Old houses make noises. They settle. They creak. But then I started hearing footsteps moving through rooms when I knew I was alone. Things would go missing, especially my keys, and then I'd find them in places I absolutely never would have put them. One night, I finally stood in the middle of the house and spoke out loud. I said, "Hi," I'm sorry if I'm in your space, but I'm 17 and I'm just trying to get out of a bad situation. This is my home for now, so please leave me alone." And strangely enough, things settled down after that. For a little while, anyway. Not long after, I started dating someone, and they moved in quickly. That relationship turned abusive too, and once the atmosphere in the house changed, the activity started picking up again. But this time, it seemed to focus on him. He would get home from work before me, but then he started waiting outside in his car until I arrived. I hadn't told him much about anything I'd experienced, so when he finally admitted he didn't want to go inside alone, I knew something had scared him badly. He told me things were being thrown at him. We had these old woven baskets sitting on a shelf, and he said one had been hurled across the room. Doors were slamming. He heard his name being called from down the hallway in the middle of the night. He saw shadows. At first, I blamed the farmhouse. I thought maybe the place itself had something attached to it. But deep down, I also wondered if the violence and fear around me were calling something back. Eventually, I got out of that relationship and moved again. Years passed. I still had experiences during that time. Lights flickered or turned on by themselves. TVs switched on and off. Whispers followed me from place to place. But nothing compared to what started happening after I moved in with my current partner. We met in 2024, and I moved into his rental not long after. It was a renovated house from the 1940s, and for the first time in ages, things were quiet. Almost too quiet. I started to relax. I almost let myself believe that whatever had been around me was finally gone. Then one day, I went back to my old town to collect some moving boxes. While I was away, my partner sent me a message. He wrote, "I know this sounds insane, but I just saw a figure standing beside our bed. It was on your side." My stomach dropped. I hadn't told him everything. It was still early in our relationship, and because nothing had been happening, I didn't see the point in frightening him with all of it. But when I came back a day or two later, everything started again. Doorknobs twisted and rattled in broad daylight, right in front of us. Footsteps stormed up and down the hallway, loud and angry. Doors opened on their own. Things moved from where we'd left them. I've always used sage in my homes. Not only when something paranormal is happening, but whenever the energy feels off. So I did what I knew how to do. I cleansed the house. It didn't help. Soon, I started waking up with bruises I couldn't explain. I was tired constantly, drained in a way that sleep didn't fix. At night, something would tug my hair hard enough to wake me. Then one night, my partner and I fell asleep on the couch. I had this dream, but it didn't feel like a normal dream. It felt like I was seeing through someone else's eyes. I was looking into our bedroom, and there was a figure standing beside the bed again. It looked like the outline of a person, but the inside of it was filled with static, like the old fuzz on a television screen. It didn't speak out loud, but I heard it anyway. It said, "Come to bed. Come to bed now. I can't help you unless you come to bed." Then it turned and started walking toward the lounge room. Before it reached us, I woke up. I shook my partner awake and started crying. I couldn't explain why, but I told him we needed to go to bed right then. Not later, right then. And the strange thing is, after we did, I slept peacefully for the first time in ages. A few weeks later, we were preparing to move again. I was out in the backyard, pulling weeds from the garden beds, when I accidentally picked up a small stone. It had a name written on it, Sander, and beside it was a childlike drawing of a figure. I don't know why, but the moment I realized what I was holding, I felt sick, uneasy, watched. I put it back exactly where I'd found it. A few days later, we moved. The new place was quiet at first, but I'd learned by then that quiet didn't always mean peace. My partner works away for long stretches, so a lot of what happened in that house happened while I was alone. The bruising came back, only worse. I'd wake up with new marks almost every day. Some looked like fingers had grabbed me. I felt exhausted constantly. I had awful dreams nearly every night. There were voices from empty rooms, banging from parts of the house where nobody was, doors opening, sheets being pulled off me while I slept, my hair being yanked until I woke up. Then, about a year later, my partner and I bought a house together. I cleansed it right away, almost like a ritual. For a few months, things seemed okay. Then they weren't. Now my partner is home more often, and he's experienced it too. We've both seen shadow figures standing in dim rooms. The TV and PlayStation have turned on by themselves in the middle of the night, waking us up each time. Doors open, objects move. The same pattern repeats, only now it feels angrier. Recently, I fell asleep on the couch while my partner was watching TV. I woke slightly when he suddenly got up in a rush and went into the kitchen. I heard banging around in there, but I assumed it was him and drifted back off. Later, he woke me and asked, "Did you hear that?" I asked him what he meant. He told me the banging hadn't been him. He'd gotten up because he heard it too. He said the walls in the kitchen were being hit over and over again, and as soon as he found the courage to go look, it stopped. Our dog noticed it too. She doesn't bark or hide. She just stares in the direction of the noise and whimpers until we tell her it's okay. Lately, the dreams have started again. I keep waking up in the middle of the night already crying. Sometimes nothing specific wakes me, but I open my eyes with tears on my face and this horrible feeling that something is near me, watching me, draining me. I wake my partner now when it happens, but even then, the feeling doesn't always leave. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but it feels like this thing hates me. Like I've offended it somehow. Like it's followed me all this time and has only become more angry. There's something else I think about often. I used to work as a carer for an elderly man. I barely spoke to his wife beyond polite hellos and goodbyes. But one day, as I was leaving, she stopped me and said, "Can you feel it with you?" I laughed it off because I didn't know what else to do. But inside, I knew exactly what she meant. She asked if I believed in spirits. I told her I did. Then she asked if I knew something was attached to me. I said yes. She told me it wasn't human. She said it wasn't exactly evil, but it was draining me. When I asked how she knew, she just said, "I see it with you every time you come here." I asked if she could help me. She said she didn't know how. So now I don't know what to do. I've tried cleansing, I've tried crystals, I've tried protection spells, I've tried ignoring it, I've tried talking to it. I'm tired. I'm tired of being afraid in my own home. I'm tired of waking up bruised, exhausted, and crying without knowing why. I don't know what kind of spirit this is, or if spirit is even the right word. I don't know if anyone else has experienced something like this, but I know I can't keep pretending it will eventually leave on its own, because it hasn't. And I'm scared that if I don't find real help, it never will. Listen, I still don't know how to explain what happened that night. It was sometime in the middle of December, the kind of night where the cold doesn't just sit outside, it follows you around. My friend Ervin and I were driving back home after a long shift at work. We were tired, half silent, and the road ahead looked endless. There were no streetlights for a long stretch, nothing around us except darkness, fields, and the sound of the engine. The headlights were the only thing cutting through the road. I remember looking at the dashboard clock. It was 12:47 a.m. Arvin was trying to keep me awake by talking about old school memories. I had the radio on low, playing some old songs, but honestly, both of us were barely holding on. Then, as we turned around a bend, we saw him. An old man. He was standing by the side of the highway, completely alone. He wore an old, faded dhoti and a dark shawl wrapped around his shoulders. His hair was gray and messy, falling near his face. But the strange thing was, he wasn't panicking. He wasn't waving desperately or calling out for help. He was just standing there, waiting. As we got closer, he slowly raised one hand. I looked at Arvin and asked, "Should we stop?" He stayed quiet for a second, then said, "There's nobody else on this road. Poor man. Let's at least ask him." So I pulled over. The old man opened the back door and got inside. The moment he entered the car, I felt the air change. I'm not saying this to make it sound dramatic. It genuinely felt colder. And there was this smell too, like wet soil, old cloth, and burnt incense. I looked at him through the mirror and said, "Where do you need to go, Tata?" He didn't answer. His head was lowered. I couldn't see his eyes properly. I thought maybe he was too tired to speak, so I started driving again. 5 minutes passed. Then 10, then maybe 20. He didn't say a word, not even a cough, not even a small movement. Every now and then, I checked the rearview mirror. He was sitting in the exact same position, completely still. The silence in the car became heavier and heavier. Finally, Arvin turned around and asked, "Tata, which village are you from?" Still nothing. No reply. No movement. That was when I started feeling something was wrong. Soon we reached the border of our village. The Eli Coville was just ahead, near the old archway. I don't know why, but I felt relieved when I saw the temple. I stopped the car near it, kept the engine running, and turned around. I said, "Tata, we've reached the village. Where exactly do you want to get down?" And then I froze. The back seat was empty. Completely empty. For a few seconds, my mind couldn't understand what I was seeing. The door hadn't opened. We hadn't stopped anywhere. There was no sound, no movement, no chance for him to get out. But he was gone. I looked at Arvin. He was staring at the empty seat with his face drained of color. He whispered, "Where did he go?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Without thinking, I got out of the car and ran straight into the temple. I went inside, fell before the deity, and started praying. Arvin came in a little later. He tried to act normal. He even gave a nervous laugh and said, "Maybe we imagined it. We were tired. We had a little drink too, remember?" I looked at him and said, "How can both of us imagine the same old man?" He had no answer. We stayed there for nearly half an hour before leaving. I dropped Arvin at his house, then drove home. Nothing else happened on the way. By the time I reached home, I was trying hard to convince myself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe the old man got out quietly when we weren't looking. Maybe we were too tired. Maybe fear made everything feel bigger than it was. I took a bath, changed my clothes, and tried to sleep. Just then, my phone rang. It was Arvin's father. He was crying. He said, "Please come quickly. Something is wrong with Arvin." My stomach tightened. I rushed to his house. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was terribly wrong. Arvin was sitting on the floor. His eyes were rolled upward, and his whole body was shaking. His family members were trying to hold him down. When he saw me, he smiled. But it wasn't his smile. It was cold, cruel, wrong. Then he spoke, and the voice that came out of him was not Arvin's. It was deep, rough, and old. He said, "Where is Ramanathan?" Everyone went silent. Arvin didn't know anyone named Ramanathan. His family didn't either. But he kept repeating it. "Where is Ramanathan? Where is Ramanathan?" Again and again. That voice sounded exactly like an old man's voice, and all I could think about was the man we had picked up on the highway. Arvin's mother was crying. His father was calling relatives. Nobody knew what to do. Then an elderly neighbor said, "Take him to the Eli Kovil, now!" So we carried him there. The priest was already awake, preparing for the early morning puja. The moment he saw Arvin, his face changed. He told everyone to stand back. He began chanting. He placed sacred ash on Arvin's forehead. At first, nothing happened. Then Arvin screamed. It echoed through the whole temple compound. The lamps near the shrine flickered hard, even though there was no wind inside. The priest kept chanting. Arvin started laughing. Not like himself. It was a horrible, broken laugh. Then he said, "The road." His voice dragged through the air. "The road belongs to me." The priest threw holy water on him. Arvin's body jerked backward. He let out one final scream, and I swear it sounded exactly like the old man from the car. Then everything went silent. Arvin collapsed. For a few minutes, nobody moved. Then slowly, he opened his eyes. He looked weak, confused, normal. He asked, "Why is everyone here?" He remembered nothing after I dropped him at his house. Nothing at all. Later, the priest told us something that still stays with me. Many years ago, an old man named Ramanathan had died on that same highway on a cold night. A speeding truck had hit him, and his body had remained unidentified for days. After that, people sometimes said they saw an old man standing near that stretch of road, asking for a ride. Most people called it a rumor. I wish it had stayed that way. Arvin recovered after a few days, and slowly, life went back to normal. But even now, whenever I drive past that road after midnight, I don't look toward the side of the highway. Because sometimes, just for a second, I feel like I can see him there. An old man standing in the dark. Quiet. Patient. Waiting for someone kind enough to stop. And if he ever raises his hand again, I won't. I'd only been living in that house for about 2 years when my parents separated. After that, the house was sold, and my mom, my little brother Jamie, and I moved into a rented place just down the same street we used to live on. And honestly, the house itself was lovely. It had the same kind of layout and feeling as the home we'd grown up in, so in a strange way, it felt familiar. Safe, even. I have to give my mom a lot of credit for that. She did everything she could to make the divorce feel less painful for me and my younger brother. She kept things steady. She made the house feel warm. She made sure we still had some kind of normal. But even with all that, there was always something about that place that felt off. Our old house had backed onto other gardens, other families, normal street life. This one was on the opposite side of the road, and the garden backed onto a steep wooded railway embankment. Beyond that were the old tracks, then open fields. During the day, it was beautiful, green, quiet, peaceful. But at night, it felt completely different. It felt like the darkness had somewhere to hide. One weekend night, it was around 1 in the morning, and I went into the kitchen to get a drink. My mom and I both had a habit of staying up late, especially on weekends, and she would usually drift off in front of the television. So I made my drink, took it back into the living room, then went back into the kitchen to switch the light off. I turned it off, stepped out, and pulled the door shut behind me. And the second the door clicked closed, I heard a voice. It was my little brother. Clear as anything, from inside the kitchen, he said, "I'm in here." And it sounded so normal. That's what still bothers me. It didn't sound dramatic or frightening. It sounded exactly like he had wandered into the kitchen without me noticing, and I'd accidentally shut him in the dark. So without thinking, I said, "Sorry," and opened the door again. I flicked the light back on. There was nobody there. The kitchen was empty. Jamie was upstairs in bed, fast asleep. Now, this next part might have been a coincidence. I've always tried to be fair about that. My mom had a habit of stacking too many plates on the draining board, and sometimes they would slip for no real reason. But at that exact moment, the plates shifted. A few of them slid, clattered, and some dropped down. That sound didn't scare me much. It had happened before. It was loud, but it was ordinary. What scared me was the voice. My brother's voice, saying something completely normal. "I'm in here." When he wasn't, and that's the part I've never been able to shake. I've spent years asking myself what I actually heard that night. Why would I hear my brother say such an everyday thing when he was nowhere near the kitchen? That, to me, is what made it so disturbing. It wasn't some figure standing in the corner of my room. It wasn't a shadow moving across the hallway. It was something pretending to be part of a normal moment. Something small, familiar, harmless. And somehow that made it worse. I know what I heard. I didn't mistake the television for his voice. He didn't sneak downstairs to scare me. He was asleep. The kitchen was empty. But something spoke from inside that room, and it used my brother's voice. We moved out of that house in early 2020. I still pass it sometimes, and I do think of it as a happy home in many ways. It gave us a little piece of normal life when everything else had been pulled apart. But no matter how warm that house felt in the daylight, I'll always remember what happened there that night. And I'll always wonder what was waiting behind that kitchen door. I still think about that Friday night because nothing about it made sense. My boyfriend Mason and I had just gotten back to my house around 2 in the morning after being out for the night. I live with my grandma and my dad, and between all of us, we've got a whole little zoo in the house. My dog, my grandma's dog, and my dad's 2 cats. So it's not exactly a quiet place. We live in a small Appalachian town, the kind where everybody knows everybody, or at least thinks they do. Our house sits on a corner lot with a big back deck and covered stairs leading down toward the driveway. People usually come in and out through the back door, and honestly, we don't lock it as often as we should. When we got inside, I went straight to the bathroom. Mason said he was going to take my dog out. I had barely been in there 30 seconds when the bathroom door cracked open and Mason stuck his head in. He looked dead serious and said, "Stay in the bathroom." Not gently, not joking. He said it like something was wrong. I was tipsy and confused, so of course I didn't listen. I opened the door a little and looked out, and I saw him standing by the back door, staring through the window like he was trying to see through the dark itself. Then he turned, saw me, hurried back, and pushed us both into my bedroom. He said, "Someone was in the house." At first, I thought he meant he heard something, but he kept shaking his head and saying, "No, I saw someone." He told me he had been standing in the kitchen, trying to get a toy away from my dog so he could take him outside. Then he noticed a light, like a flashlight, moving, and when he looked up, he saw the back of a person walking right out through our back door. At first, he thought it was my grandma, but then he looked into her room and saw her asleep. He took a couple more steps and saw my dad passed out on the couch in the living room. So whoever he saw wasn't anyone who lived there. He ran to the back door and opened it. He said he could hear footsteps going down the deck stairs. Then he shut the door and stood there watching outside, and that's when I came out of the bathroom. He told me he was going to take the dog out, grab his gun from the car, and look around the outside of the house. And this is the part that still bothers me. My dog is huge, around 130 pounds, and Mason said he practically had to force him down the stairs because he did not want to go. That dog is usually fearless. That night, he wanted no part of whatever was out there. Mason didn't see anyone outside, so he told me to wake my grandma up and ask if she had someone over because, honestly, she has had some questionable taste in men lately. I went into her room, shook her awake, and asked if anyone had been at the house. She said no. I said, "Are you sure?" Because Mason thinks he heard someone going out the back door. And Mason corrected me right away. He said, "I didn't hear someone. I saw someone." My grandma just told us to lock the door and went back to sleep. We were both rattled. Mason kept saying he knew how crazy it sounded, but he saw a person and then heard them leaving. I believed him because I could see how shaken he was. He wasn't trying to scare me. He looked scared himself. But here's what I couldn't understand. How could someone be in our house and neither dog react? And how could someone get past Mason in the kitchen without him noticing until they were already at the door? He was only about 8 feet away. The only thing that made any sense was that someone had come in, realized Mason and my giant dog were standing right there, and tried to slip back out before getting caught. The next morning, my grandma barely remembered me waking her up. My dad didn't believe it at all. He said, "Why would someone come in here with cars in the driveway and the TV on?" He also said the dogs would have gone insane if someone had really been inside. Then he joked that Mason shouldn't do mushrooms if he couldn't handle them. But Mason doesn't even like scary movies. He won't watch paranormal stuff. He is not the kind of person who would make something like that up for fun. So I kept thinking about it. Then Saturday night happened. I got home from work around 3 in the morning. I work at a bar, so that's normal for me. When I came in, my dad shot up off the couch and said, "Oh, you scared me. I didn't hear you come in. But you are not going to believe what happened tonight." He told me he heard someone run across the back porch. He went outside, thinking he was finally going to catch whoever it was. He walked around the house, didn't see anybody, and came back inside. Then he said one of the cats was floating in the kitchen. I just stared at him. He said the cat was about 3 feet off the ground, and then it dropped. He walked over near the pantry, and he said it felt like someone was standing right there in front of it. He reached his hand out, and he swore something blocked him. Like he couldn't touch the pantry door because something was in the way. Then he said whatever it was pushed him back into the counter. He swung at it, and it was gone. But now there's a hole in the pantry door from where he punched at it. I remember saying, "Are you serious? The cat was levitating? Come on." But he swore up and down that it happened exactly like that. And the thing is, he sounded just like Mason had the night before. He knew it sounded ridiculous, but he was completely convinced. Now I'm just waiting for something to happen to me, because part of me still can't believe it. My grandma has owned this house for more than 30 years. My dad has lived here since he was a teenager. Nothing like this has ever happened before. So why now? That's the part I keep coming back to. Why now? was 18 when I finally started telling people about one of the most frightening things that ever happened to me. But the actual night happened when I was 15. I'm from Northern Ireland, though I've always just thought of it as Ireland in my own head. That weekend, I was taking part in the Duke of Edinburgh Award, and our group had gone out hiking and camping in the Mourne Mountains. We were staying near Tollymore Forest Park, in one of those places that feels beautiful during the day, but completely different once the light disappears. It was the final night of the trip, and we were all exhausted. We'd spent the whole day walking over rough ground, carrying heavy bags, trying to pretend our feet weren't killing us. Our tents were pitched a fair distance from the bathroom block, maybe 10 or 15 minutes away on foot, and before bed, we all made the little trek over to wash up. I ended up being the last one inside. The bathrooms were old, dim, and not exactly comforting. The lights had this dull amber glow, and everything smelled faintly damp. I was washing my hands when one of the hand dryers suddenly blasted on behind me. I froze. I was nowhere near it. After a second, I told myself it was probably a moth or a fly setting off the sensor. There were insects everywhere that night, so that explanation was easy enough to grab onto. I finished washing my hands as quickly as I could. Then, the bathroom door rattled. Not gently either. It shook like somebody was standing outside, pulling at it. I thought it was one of the lads messing about, trying to hurry me up. So I opened the door, already annoyed and ready to say something. But nobody was there. Down the path, I could see the beams from my friends' torches moving away toward the campsite. They were already well ahead of me. I remember feeling irritated more than scared at first, probably because being angry was easier. I just shut the door behind me and started walking back. But halfway along the path, something changed. I got this sudden, horrible feeling that I was being watched. Not just nerves, not just the dark. It felt focused, like someone had turned their attention directly onto me. My skin went cold, and every hair on my arm seemed to lift at once. I tried to keep walking normally, but I couldn't. I started jogging, then running. At one point, I heard a thin, whining sound coming from the trees off to my side. I told myself it was an animal, a fox maybe, something harmless. I didn't stop to check. When I reached the gate near the campsite, my friends were waiting there, laughing at first because I'd come charging up the trail. But once they saw my face, they went quiet. We walked the last stretch together. That was when we noticed the tents. Something was wrong. A few bags had been pulled open. One tent flap was half unzipped. Stuff had shifted around in ways none of us remembered leaving it. We were 15, tired, and suddenly very aware that we had no phones, no easy way to contact anyone, and no real idea whether somebody was still nearby. Naturally, because teenage logic is a strange little machine, we decided the best response was to light a campfire and roast marshmallows. For a while, we tried to act like everything was fine. We joked too loudly. We kept the fire going. We stayed close together. But even the fire felt strange. It kept dipping low for no reason, then flaring up in odd little bursts. The wind would move through the campsite in these sudden cold pulls, and every so often someone would stop talking because they thought they'd heard something. Nobody wanted to be the one to say it, but we were all unsettled. Eventually, around midnight, we gave up and went to bed. None of us wanted to sleep alone, so we paired off in the tents. My friend Kaylin ended up sleeping beside me. I must have fallen asleep for a while, because the next thing I remember is waking suddenly in the dark. At first, I didn't know what had woken me. Then, I heard Kaylin's voice outside the tent. It was quiet, but clear enough. It sounded like he was standing just beyond the fabric, saying my name. My stomach dropped, because Kaylin was right beside me. I could hear him breathing. I could feel him shift slightly in his sleeping bag. I lay there completely still, too scared to move, listening to the voice outside. It sounded so much like him that my mind couldn't make sense of it. After a few seconds, I reached over and shook him awake. The second he stirred, the voice stopped. We didn't sleep much after that. We just lay there, whispering, listening to every crackle, every rustle, every small sound from outside the tent until morning finally came. To this day, I don't really know what happened that night. The sensible part of me can explain pieces of it. The hand dryer could have been triggered by insects. The door could have rattled from wind. The tents could have been disturbed by an animal. The voice might have been exhaustion, or someone else nearby, or my brain playing tricks after a long day in the mountains. But it didn't feel like that. It felt deliberate. And even now, years later, whenever I think about that campsite near Tollymore, I remember lying in that tent in the dark, hearing my friend's voice outside while he was asleep right next to me. I'm 20 years old, male, and I'm from Australia. Before I get into this, I just want to say up front that I know how it sounds. I know it sounds like something someone would make up for attention or dress up to be scarier than it really was. But I'm telling you honestly, this happened. It's still happening. And I don't really know what to do with it anymore. My whole life, sleep has been strange for me. When I was little, I used to wake up and see these tall, dark shapes standing near my bed. They were huge, almost stretched up toward the ceiling, and I remember being terrified of them at first. Any kid would be. But the strange thing is, they never felt like they were there to hurt me. They felt watchful, protective even. It's hard to explain, but there was this calmness around them, like they were guarding the room. Like as frightening as they looked, they weren't the danger. They were there because of the danger. Eventually, those shadows stopped appearing. I got older, and I told myself it was just childhood imagination. A weird little phase, something I'd grown out of. But then my teenage years brought something different. Nightmares. Not just bad dreams either. These were awful, vivid nightmares that felt completely real while I was inside them. Murder, creatures, vampires, witches, demons, people screaming, blood, all of it. They were constant through high school, and everyone seemed to end in some kind of horrible death or tragedy. It was exhausting, genuinely exhausting. But there was always one comfort. It was a dream. No matter how bad it got, I could wake up. I could sit there in bed, shaken and sweating, remind myself none of it had happened, and move on with my day. I had slept, I had dreamed, and I was safe. That comfort doesn't feel so solid anymore. I'm saying all this late at night because, honestly, I'm stalling. I'm putting off going to sleep. These last few weeks have made me scared in a way I don't even like admitting out loud, except maybe to my family. A little while ago, the nightmares suddenly stopped. For the first time in ages, I was sleeping without remembering anything. No monsters, no violence, no horrible dream worlds, just blank sleep. And at first, I thought that was a good thing. I thought maybe my brain had finally given me a break. But then my family started mentioning things. They'd ask me in the morning if I was okay. They said they'd heard shouting from my room at night, sometimes yelling, sometimes what sounded like screaming. I told them that couldn't be right because I wasn't having nightmares anymore. I wasn't remembering anything at all. For a while, I brushed it off. My sleep has always been weird, so this just felt like another odd little chapter in the same ugly book. Then one morning, I woke up and my room was wrong. To explain it properly, my bed sits sort of in the middle of the room, pushed against one wall. I've got a bedside table on either side. There are 2 doors on opposite walls. One opens into the house. The other opens outside onto a small balcony that leads down toward the yard. That morning, the outside door was completely blocked. Not just a little blocked, barricaded. One bedside table, a heavy wooden chair, and part of a shelving unit had been shoved in front of it. Somehow, while asleep, I had moved large pieces of furniture across the room and stacked them against that door. I had no memory of doing it. No dream, no reason, nothing. I moved everything back, tried to laugh it off, and went on with my day. I told myself maybe I had been sleepwalking. Maybe it was strange, sure, but not impossible. I wish that had been the end of it. A few nights later, it was pouring rain. Proper heavy rain. The kind that makes the whole house sound hollow. It was deep into the night, and I'd been asleep for a few hours. Then I woke up, and I was already running, outside, completely naked. I was sprinting through the side of the house, through wet grass and mud, straight into branches and scrub. My feet were filthy. My skin was soaked. Twigs were scratching my arms and legs, and I was just moving, fast, like I'd been awake the whole time. But I hadn't been. That's the part I can't get past. I woke up in the middle of it, already running, and even then I didn't stop right away. I didn't panic because I was naked. I didn't panic because I was outside in the rain. I didn't even panic because I had somehow gotten off the balcony while unconscious, even though the stairs are old and slippery enough that I barely trust them when I'm awake. None of that mattered. Because in that moment, I knew something was behind me. I didn't see it clearly. I didn't need to. I felt it. The same way I used to feel that the shadows in my room were protecting me. I could feel what this thing wanted. And it did not want to protect me. It wanted me. It was hungry. Not in a normal way, not like an animal. It felt cruel, focused. Like if I slowed down, it would reach me, and whatever happened next would be worse than anything I'd ever dreamed. So I ran. That's the thing I can't explain to myself. I wasn't just sleepwalking. I wasn't calmly wandering through the house. I was fleeing. My whole body believed I was being hunted. There's more to this, and this wasn't the only time I felt that presence. Things have happened since then. Worse things, honestly. But this is all I can manage to say right now. And if I'm being truthful, this is all the stalling I can get away with tonight. I have to try to sleep again. Wish me luck. I grew up in a Christian home. We were Baptist, so Sundays meant church, usually for hours at a time. And I don't say this with bitterness, because there were good people there, and I know a lot of them truly believed. But even as a little kid, I don't think I ever fully connected with it. I remember being maybe 6 or 7, sitting there and wondering why the adults were telling us stories that sounded impossible. I kept thinking, are we really supposed to believe this happened? It felt less like truth to me, and more like something grown-ups had agreed to pretend was true. As I got older, I started looking into other beliefs. Around 12 or 13, I found the words paganism and Wicca, and that lit something up in me. I was a curious kid, probably too curious. While other kids were riding bikes or playing games online, I was in my room trying to feel energy between my hands and reading about spells I barely understood. And yes, I got into seances too. Not seriously at first, more like the way a kid pokes at a dark closet because they want to prove they're brave. When I was 13, I convinced a friend of mine to use a Ouija board with me. Her name was Kayla. She really didn't want to do it, but I kept pushing until she finally agreed. Her one rule was that we had to leave the lights on, so we shut ourselves in my bedroom. I pulled out the board, the kind you could buy at any toy store back then. Beige and black, plastic planchette, little clear window in the middle. Nothing about it looked powerful. Honestly, it looked cheap. I explained the rules to her, very seriously, because of course at 13 I thought I knew things. I told her not to move it on purpose. She told me not to move it either. We put our fingers on the planchette and started asking questions. At first, nothing happened. We laughed a little, whispered, argued about what counted as a good question. Then the planchette moved. I asked, "Is someone here?" It spelled out D-E-A-D. Kayla screamed. I mean, she really screamed. She said, "It says dead. Why are you doing that?" I told her I wasn't moving it. She accused me again. I told her to keep her hands on it. Then the planchette moved to no so hard that it made both of us freeze. I asked, "Are you still here?" It moved to yes. I asked, "How old are you?" It spelled 13. Then I asked, "What's your name?" It started spelling A-Z-A-R, and Kayla ripped her hands away. She said, "No, I'm done. Put it away." I remember being annoyed, which sounds ridiculous now. At the time, I felt like she had ruined something important. Something real was finally happening, and she was too scared to keep going. So I shoved the board back into my closet. Kayla sat on my bed, completely still. My bedroom door was closed. It was late, and I decided we should just go to sleep. I reached up and turned off the light. The second the room went dark, my bed started shaking. At first, it was subtle, just enough that I thought maybe I imagined it. Then it got stronger. My bed had a metal frame, and it was pushed against the wall, so when it shook harder, it started banging against the wall. Loud, violent, like someone had grabbed it with both hands and was trying to throw it across the room. Then it stopped. Kayla jumped from my bed to the door so fast it barely looked real. She flung it open and started yelling that I was messing with her. I yelled back that she was messing with me. But I checked the room. I checked under the bed. I checked the frame. There was nothing. As an adult, I've wondered if maybe it was some kind of small earthquake. But we were in Northeast Texas, and I had never felt anything like that before or after. And even if it was, the timing still bothers me. Kayla ran home that night. It was around 2 in the morning. Her mom didn't answer the phone, so she just left. She never slept over again. Years later, when we were in our 20s, she messaged me out of nowhere and asked if I remembered that night. She said she still wouldn't step foot in my dad's house again. After that, I learned about shielding, cleansing, protection, all of it. I got rid of the board. Life moved on. I had other strange experiences over the years, but that story became one of those spooky things I'd tell at parties. I usually skipped most of the details and went straight from "we used the board" to "the bed shook." Then, in early 2012, everything changed. I was newly married, and my husband and I had just moved into a rental house in a quiet neighborhood. It was a nice place. Nothing about it felt wrong at first. Our first night there, my husband had to work. I wasn't usually afraid to be alone, but I stayed up late putting blinds on the bedroom windows because I hated the idea of waking up and seeing someone standing outside, looking in. That fear has never really left me. Eventually, I fell asleep, and I had a dream that felt too real. In the dream, I was still unpacking. Boxes were everywhere. I was in the kitchen, moving dishes around, trying to make the house feel like ours. Then there was a knock at the front door. When I looked outside, it was suddenly night. I put the chain lock on before opening the door. When I cracked it open, there was a man standing there. He was handsome in a polished, unsettling way. Dark hair combed neatly to one side. A coat, dress pants, a tie. Clear blue eyes that looked straight through me. He wasn't especially tall, but he carried himself with this quiet confidence that made my stomach tighten. He smiled and said, "Hello, I wanted to welcome you to my home. May I come in?" Something inside me screamed, "No." I told him no. He smiled wider and said, "But you want to." And the awful thing is, part of me did. Somewhere in my mind, I remembered hearing that certain things couldn't enter unless they were invited. I don't know why that came to me, but it did. I also felt, with absolute certainty, that I needed his name. So I asked, "What was your name?" He murmured something I couldn't understand. Then he asked again if he could come in. I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that." For just a second, his face changed. The smile dropped. He looked irritated, almost angry. Then it was gone, and he was smiling again. He said, "Why don't you just let me in? Everything will be fine if you let me in." I started to panic because I could feel myself weakening. Every part of me knew not to open that door, but my body wouldn't close it either. Then I had this thought, ask 3 times. So I asked again, "What is your name?" He stepped closer, just enough that I could see his eyes more clearly through the crack in the door. He said, "If I tell you my name, will you let me in?" Before I could stop myself, I said yes. He smiled and said, "Good girl. My name is Azrael. I am a fallen angel of God. You will let me in now." And then I did. It was like I wasn't driving my own body anymore. My head felt foggy. I closed the door just enough to undo the chain. Then I opened it and stepped back. The moment he crossed the threshold, the fog lifted, and I couldn't remember his name. I just remember thinking, who is this man? Why is he in my house? How did he get me to open the door? He moved past me like he belonged there. Not rushed, not curious exactly. More like he was inspecting something he already owned. He walked into the bedroom. He touched a few things, picked at the edge of a blanket, muttered words I couldn't understand. Then he turned and looked right at me. He took my hand and said, "Welcome to my home. I have to leave now, but I'll be back. Go back to sleep." The words didn't sound like English, but I understood them anyway. As he walked to the door, he turned and smiled. And suddenly I knew something without knowing how I knew it. This was not his first visit, and it would not be his last. He disappeared into the dark, and I closed and locked the door. Then I woke up in bed, panicked and sweating. The first thing I thought was, where did that dream come from? The second was, why can't I remember his name? Over the next few months, I started having sleep paralysis. At first, it happened occasionally, then more often. I researched everything I could. I even talked to my doctor, but medically, nothing seemed wrong. After about 6 months, it was happening almost every week. Eventually, I went to see a psychic reader. I didn't really know what else to do. She seemed uncomfortable almost immediately. She told me there was something dark around me, something attached, and that it was trying to damage my marriage. I didn't know what to do with that. I'm skeptical by nature, even with my own experiences, so I tried not to swallow it whole. Then she asked me if I had ever used a Ouija board. She said whatever it was had been around me since I was about 13. That hit me hard. She wouldn't explain much more, or maybe she couldn't. She just told me I needed protection and suggested I start going to church. I left with more questions than answers. The dreams got worse for a while. I burned sage. I prayed in my own way. I imagined light around myself before I slept. Sometimes it helped. Sometimes it didn't. Less than a year later, I filed for divorce and asked my ex to leave the house. and the dreams stopped. Immediately. I also had friends come over and help me cleanse the house, just to be safe. So I can't say with certainty what changed things. Maybe it was the cleansing. Maybe it was him leaving. Maybe it was me finally taking my life back. But I slept again. And after months of being afraid to close my eyes, that felt like getting a piece of my soul returned to me. I haven't had anything happen since that felt connected to it. Part of me wonders if whatever it was got what it wanted and left. Another part of me wonders if it followed my ex when he went. I don't know. I cut contact a few months after the divorce, so I have no idea what happened to him after that. And I'll be honest, I've wondered if the second half of it was stress. That marriage was abusive, and stress can do terrible things to the mind and body. But that still doesn't explain the psychic knowing about the Ouija board. It doesn't explain the name starting the same way when I was 13. It doesn't explain the feeling I had when that man stepped into my dream house like he owned it. So I don't claim to know exactly what happened. I only know what I experienced. And I know this. Some doors should never be opened just because you're curious about what's on the other side. I still remember this clearly. It happened in 2011, when I was studying at a boarding school in the hills of Himachal. I was in class 10 then, and our board exams were getting dangerously close, so everyone was a little stressed in that quiet, serious way students get near finals. That night, I stayed behind in the study room to finish revising 2 chapters. It was a big room, full of long wooden desks and those old chairs that made noise even when you barely touched them. Usually, there were 10 or 12 of us studying there late, whispering, turning pages, pretending not to be sleepy. But I had been so buried in my notebook that I didn't notice everyone leaving. When I finally looked up, I realized I was alone. Outside, it had been raining for hours. The school was built on a slope, surrounded by trees, and the rain kept tapping against the roof and windows. At first, it felt peaceful, almost comforting. Then the lights flickered. I looked around, but nothing seemed wrong. I told myself it was just the weather. These old hill schools always had power issues during rain. I only had a few pages left, so I bent over my book again and tried to focus. That's when I noticed a small, crumpled ball of paper lying on the floor a little distance away, maybe 15 or 20 feet from my desk. I remembered seeing it earlier and didn't think much of it. A few moments later, I heard a chair move. Not fall, not shift, move. It made this slow scraping sound across the floor. I looked up so fast my neck hurt, but the room was empty. Every chair was exactly where it should have been. For a few seconds, I just sat there staring. Then I laughed under my breath. The kind of laugh you make when you're trying to convince yourself you're not scared. I thought maybe I was exhausted. Maybe my mind was playing little midnight tricks on me. So I went back to reading. But when I looked up again, the paper ball was closer. Not right next to me, but close enough that I knew it hadn't been there before. I stared at it for a long moment. My first thought was wind. Maybe a window was open somewhere. Maybe the rain had pushed air through the cracks. There had to be some ordinary explanation, because ordinary explanations are what you cling to when your brain starts knocking on stranger doors. I forced myself to keep studying. 1 minute passed. Then, without even meaning to, I looked up again. The paper was closer now. Maybe 8 or 9 feet away. That was when I felt my chest tighten. I remember whispering to myself, "Don't be ridiculous, Arun. Finish the chapter and go." So I did. Or at least, I tried. I read the same paragraph again and again, but none of the words stayed in my head. The room suddenly felt too large, too quiet. Even the rain seemed far away for a moment. Then something touched my right foot. I froze completely. Very slowly, I looked down. That same crumpled paper ball was resting against my shoe. There was no wind. None. The windows were on the far side of the room, shut against the rain. I grabbed the paper and threw it hard across the room, harder than I needed to. It hit the floor and stopped near the last row of desks. I kept staring at it. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then it moved. But it didn't roll. It dragged. Slowly, deliberately. Like something I couldn't see had pinched it between invisible fingers and was pulling it back toward me. I can still feel what happened inside me then. My hands went cold. My stomach dropped. Every bit of courage I thought I had just disappeared. And before I could even stand properly, the lights went out. The whole study room fell into complete darkness. The rain sounded louder now, almost angry, like the sky had leaned closer to listen. I pushed my chair back and stood up, and the scraping noise it made nearly made me jump out of my skin. I didn't care about my books anymore. I didn't care about my bag. I just wanted the door. Then lightning flashed. For one sharp second, the entire room turned white, and on the wall in front of me, I saw a shadow. A woman's shadow. Tall. Still. And it wasn't mine. That was it. Something in me broke loose. I ran. I ran out of the study hall, through the corridor, down the stairs, and straight back to the dormitory without looking behind me once. I left everything there. My books, my bag, even my sweater. When I reached my bed, I pulled the blanket over my head and tried to breathe quietly, as if making sound would somehow tell whatever it was where I had gone. I didn't tell anyone that night. I just lay there awake, shaking, listening to the rain. And sometime before morning, caught somewhere between fear and disbelief, I cried myself to sleep. I was 11 when this happened, and even now, I still don't really know what to call it. Back then, my best friend, let's call her Aria, and I were playing Apex Legends late at night. It was already past midnight, and we were in a PlayStation party with another friend of ours, who I'll call Kayla. Aria had Kayla's phone number, but I didn't. So while we were all joking around, Aria gave it to me, and we came up with this dumb little prank. The idea was that I would text Kayla from my phone, say some creepy things, scare her for a minute, and then we'd reveal it was us. We were kids. We thought it was funny. We were not thinking it through at all. So I started texting her strange stuff. At first, she replied with things like, "Who is this?" and "Stop messing with me." And because I was fully committed to the prank, I sent messages like, "I'm coming for you, Kayla," and "I'm outside your house." Just stupid, creepy kid nonsense. Then she stopped replying. At first, Aria and I thought maybe she got annoyed or went to sleep, but then she didn't come back online the next day, or the day after that. We started getting worried. We spam called her, messaged her, tried everything. Nothing. A few days later, she finally joined the PlayStation party. The second she got in, Aria and I practically jumped on her with questions. "Are you okay? Where have you been? Why did you disappear?" And Kayla sounded exhausted. Shaken, honestly. She said, "A few nights ago, some creep was messaging me. Then someone tried to break into my house." Aria and I went silent. We asked her what she meant, and she explained that when she got those messages, she got scared and showed her grandmother. Her grandmother called the police and also called Kayla's dad, who was a cop at the time. When the police and her dad got to the house, they found a grown man on the front porch with a backpack. He was trying to get in. From what Kayla told us, they arrested him, took everyone down to the station, and later found out he had horrible intentions. He had things in his bag that made it clear he wasn't just some random guy wandering around at midnight. And then Kayla sent screenshots of the messages to Aria. They were my messages. The creepy texts that made her grandmother call the police were the ones I had sent as a prank. I remember sitting there completely frozen. Aria was crying. Kayla sounded like she was barely holding herself together, and I felt sick because part of me thought, this is my fault. Even though another part of me knew that if those messages hadn't scared her, she might not have gone to her grandmother at all. A little while later, I texted Aria privately and asked, "Are you two pranking me back? Is this revenge?" She said no. She even showed me that she and Kayla hadn't talked since the night Kayla disappeared. And honestly, the way Kayla sounded in that party, there was no way she was acting. She was scared. Aria was scared. I was scared. For years, I brushed it off as one of those strange coincidences life throws at you. But looking back, I still can't explain it. We sent Kayla creepy messages about someone being outside her house, right before there actually was someone outside her house. Those messages made her go to her grandmother. Her grandmother called the police. The police and her dad arrived just in time to find a grown man on the porch with a backpack, trying to get inside. And the only people home were a 14-year-old girl and her elderly grandmother. So I still wonder about it. Did we accidentally save her? Did I somehow sense something without knowing it? Was it just the strangest timing in the world? Or was there something else nudging things into place that night? I'm not someone who jumps straight to paranormal explanations, but this one has always stayed with me. Because that prank was supposed to scare her for a few minutes. Instead, it may have saved her life. I was born in Sweetwater, Texas, back in the early 80s. We lived a little ways outside town, on a patch of land that technically wasn't part of anything yet. I used to call it the yellow grass place, because that's mostly what it was. Yellow grass, low spots that filled with tadpoles after a hard rain, and those thorny mesquite trees standing around like they were guarding secrets. My dad's side of the family had been there for generations. They came west after the Civil War, carrying a lot of old mountain stories with them. My dad worked in oil exploration out near Abilene, and he believed in things most people would rather laugh off. He called them haints. That was his word for anything you couldn't quite explain. Ghosts, strange lights, creatures in the brush, whatever moved just outside the edge of reason. So I grew up around odd stories. Strange things didn't scare me the way they might scare someone else. But what started happening when I was 9 years old was different. It didn't feel like an old family tale. It felt personal. That was the year my mother started talking like she hated the land. She called it empty, ugly, a flat little nowhere. She didn't like our neighbors. She didn't like the oil field people. She didn't like the trailer park nearby. And more, she kept asking me whether I wouldn't rather live closer to my Granny Nell in Garland, where there were stores and sidewalks and other kids. Not long after that, my parents divorced. The first custody arrangement split my life right down the middle. For part of the year, I stayed with my dad out on the land near Sweetwater. For the rest, I lived with my mother near Dallas, first in Garland and then later in Mesquite, in one of those brand new neighborhoods where every house looked freshly stamped out of the same mold. Living there was hard, not because of the house itself exactly, but because of the pressure inside it. My mother's relatives were always talking to me about court, always trying to get me to say I wanted to stay in the city permanently. I spent a lot of time alone in my room, playing Nintendo, watching old reruns, and keeping the volume up on my little sticker-covered black and white television so I wouldn't have to hear the grown-ups talking. That's when the noises started. At first, it was just the attic. Whenever my mother stood outside my bedroom door, talking about lawyers or judges or what I needed to say, I'd hear something heavy being dragged across the floor above me. Not a scratch, not a creak. A real dragging sound, like a trunk being pulled from one side of the attic to the other. Then the room would go cold. I mean cold in a way that made no sense. One minute it was normal, and the next it felt like all the warmth had been sucked out through the walls. And this wasn't some old farmhouse settling in the wind. This was a new house in a new subdivision. No history, no creaking bones, just drywall, carpet, and something that seemed to know when I was scared. The first time it became impossible to ignore, I was in the kitchen with my mother and two of my aunts. They had papers on the table, and they wanted me to sign something. I remember my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. And then every cabinet door in that kitchen flew open at once. For half a second, nobody moved. Then every single one slammed shut so hard the wood cracked. My mother stopped talking. My aunts froze. Before anyone could say a word, the silverware drawer shot open and dumped knives, forks, and spoons all over the floor. Nobody tried to explain that one right away. It happened at my dad's place too, though not as often. One evening, after a terrible phone call with my mother and her attorney, I felt so upset it was almost like my skin was buzzing. I was in my bedroom when the windows started vibrating. Then, one after another, they cracked. My dresser slid away from the wall by itself. My dad came to the doorway pale as paper, holding a shotgun he never raised. He just stood there, looking into the room, and said the haints were feeding on my nervous spirit. But the mesquite house was worse. Much worse. I'd wake up and find my furniture rearranged into strange stacks, like someone had been building towers while I slept. I'd hear thumping inside the walls so loud it knocked pictures crooked. Sometimes things moved when no one was near them. Sometimes the room turned icy the moment I started crying. Once, I was sitting on the bathroom floor, completely overwhelmed, when the mirror burst outward. Glass rained down around me, sparkling all over the tile. Not one piece cut me. I still don't know how that's possible. The second custody trial happened the summer I turned 12. That time, the judge gave my dad primary custody. And once that happened, the pressure changed. My mother's side didn't have the same hold over me anymore. There was nothing left to squeeze out of me. And slowly, the activity faded. By the time I was 13, the mesquite house had gone quiet. My things stayed where I left them. The cold spots disappeared. The thumps stopped. The cabinets stayed shut. For the rest of my teenage years, I still moved between homes, still had to adjust to the strange shape of my family, but whatever had been tearing through that house was gone. I'm in my mid-40s now. I own the yellow grass place these days. My dad retired out in New Mexico, and my mother still lives in that same mesquite house. I've had other strange experiences in my life, but nothing ever came close to that. Nothing ever felt so connected to fear, to pressure, to a child being pulled too hard in two different directions. And the strangest part is this. Once the pressure lifted, the house finally learned how to be silent. So, my sister-in-law spent the weekend at my uncle's house with my brother, and something happened there that honestly still gives me chills when I think about it. My uncle lives there with his wife and their two kids. Their son is 19, let's call him Rohit, and their daughter is 11, let's call her Ruhi. My brother and my sister-in-law were visiting, and my sister-in-law is pregnant. The house has 3 bedrooms. My brother and sister-in-law took one room. My uncle and aunt slept in another, and the kids slept out in the living room. The third bedroom was empty that night. At around 4 in the morning, my sister-in-law woke up because she needed to use the bathroom. She went in, finished, and while she was washing her hands at the sink, she looked up into the mirror. Now, from that mirror, you can see part of the empty third bedroom behind you. There's a couch in there, and when she looked into the mirror, she saw a boy sitting on that couch. Not standing, not walking past, just sitting there. The whole house was dark, so she couldn't see his face clearly, but she could see the shape of him. A young boy, around Rohit's age. But she knew right away it wasn't Rohit. His haircut was different, and besides, Rohit was sleeping in the living room with his sister. She was absolutely terrified. She didn't even turn around properly to check. She just rushed back to her room, locked the door, got into bed, and started quietly saying prayers until she somehow fell asleep again. The next morning, around 6, when my brother woke up, she told him everything. He went to check the room and said maybe she had been half asleep. Maybe the darkness made her imagine something. But she kept saying, "No, I know what I saw." Then she asked him to sit on the couch in the exact spot where she had seen the boy, while she stood at the sink and looked through the mirror. And the moment he sat there, she got goosebumps, because that was exactly what she had seen. A boy's silhouette sitting on the couch. Later, when my uncle and aunt woke up, my brother and sister-in-law told them what had happened. And that's when things became even stranger. My uncle said this wasn't the first time someone had seen a boy in that room. When Ruhi was only about 3 or 4 years old, she used to say there was a boy in that bedroom. Not once, but several times. She said he would call her, not with words, but by moving his hand, like he wanted her to come closer. At the time, everyone dismissed it. She was tiny, and they thought maybe she was imagining things, or scared of shadows. They comforted her and told her nothing was there. But there was one detail she had mentioned back then. She said the boy looked around the same age as Rohit was at the time. Rohit would have been about 11 then. And now, 8 years later, my sister-in-law saw a boy who looked around Rohit's current age, 19. That's the part I can't stop thinking about. 2 different people saw something in the same room, years apart. Both saw a boy. Both described him as being around Rohit's age at that point in time. Then my uncle brought up something I didn't even know before. Apparently, after Rohit was born, my uncle and aunt had another pregnancy about 2 years later, but they decided not to continue it because they weren't ready for a second child at that time. My uncle now wonders whether the boy could somehow be connected to that child. He said maybe that's why Ruhi saw him when she was little, because Ruhi was the child they eventually had later. Maybe, in some strange way, that boy felt like she had taken his place. And then my sister-in-law asked him, "But why did I see him?" My uncle simply said, "Maybe because you're pregnant." I don't know what to make of any of it. The whole thing feels deeply unsettling, especially because the 2 experiences happened about 8 years apart, but the boys seem to have aged along with Rohit. That's what keeps bothering me the most. Do spirits grow older the way people do? Or was it something else entirely? I really don't know. But that room, that couch, and that mirror will never feel ordinary to me again. I still think about this sometimes, even though it happened a long time ago. I bumped into the younger sister of an old high school friend of mine, Patricia, totally by chance. We hadn't seen each other in years, so we started catching up, and that was when she told me something that stayed with me. She said Patricia hadn't really left the house in almost a year. Her family was worried sick. They thought maybe it was depression, maybe something else, but they didn't know how to reach her anymore. And then her sister asked if I might visit. She thought maybe seeing someone from the old days would help, even just a little. That night, I called our mutual friend from high school, Stella. The three of us used to be close, and I knew she'd want to know. Now, I should say this about Stella. She's always had this strange sensitivity. She doesn't call herself psychic or anything dramatic like that, but she picks up on things. Moods, presences, places that feel wrong. She rarely talks about it unless she has to. So the next afternoon, Stella and I went to see Patricia. And honestly, when Patricia opened the door, she looked normal. Tired maybe, but normal. She smiled. She hugged us. She asked about our lives. For a while, it almost felt like we were back in school again, just older and quieter around the edges. But whenever we gently asked how she was really doing, she would pull away. Not physically, but you could feel it. Like a curtain dropping behind her eyes. Then, after a long silence, she said, very softly, "I'm not lonely. I talked to someone." I asked, "Who?" She looked past us toward the hallway and said, "I talked to the air." The room went completely still. I glanced at Stella and her face had gone pale. Not surprised, not confused, pale. When we were leaving, Patricia insisted on walking us out to the gate of the subdivision. Stella said goodbye first and left in a hurry. I remember thinking she looked like she couldn't get away fast enough. So it was just me and Patricia, standing there near the little guard shed, waiting for my brother to pick me up on his motorcycle. When he arrived, he greeted her politely, but I noticed this tiny flicker of confusion on his face. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured he just hadn't seen her in years and was trying to place her. Later that night, while we were eating dinner, my brother asked how the visit had gone. I told him I wasn't sure. I said Patricia seemed fine on the outside, but something still felt wrong. Then he asked, casually, "Was that her cousin with you two?" I froze. "What cousin?" He looked at me and said, "The woman standing by the shed, the one who kept watching you." I remember my hand going cold around my glass. There had been no cousin, no sister, no neighbor, no one standing by the shed. It had only been me and Patricia. And right then, before I could even answer him properly, my phone lit up. It was a message from Stella. All it said was, "There's something in that house with her." I want to tell you about the first memory I have that I can only call a glitch. Or maybe a displacement. I still don't have the right word for it. I was really young, and I don't remember the exact year, but it must have been somewhere around 1999 or 2000. Back then, my family lived in this old, yellowish-green house out in the country near Winsboro, Texas. It was quiet out there. The kind of quiet that makes every little sound feel bigger than it should. I remember standing on the front porch one evening. The door was open behind me, and I had wandered outside for no real reason, the way kids do. I was looking through the window at my family inside. They were moving around, talking, just being normal. And then I saw someone behind me in the reflection of the glass. At first, I thought it was one of my siblings trying to scare me. But when I turned around, there was this figure standing on the porch in front of me. It had the shape of a person, but it wasn't a person. It was about my size, but it didn't feel like a child. Not at all. Its skin had this deep, bruised blue color, and it was completely soaked. Water was dripping off of it in heavy drops, hitting the boards of the porch one after another. I can still hear that sound sometimes when I think about it. But the worst part was its eyes. They were solid blue. No whites, no pupils, just blue all the way through. When I looked into them, I remember feeling like I was sinking. Like cold water had filled the air around me and was closing over my head. It felt like every bit of warmth around me was being pulled away. And then, suddenly, I was sitting at the dinner table. No walk back inside, no door opening, no sound fading in or out, nothing. 1 second I was outside on the porch, frozen in fear, staring at that thing, and the next second I was sitting in my chair with my family around me, smelling hot chicken casserole on the table. Everyone else was acting completely normal. My parents were fussing about dinner. My mom told me to eat because she wasn't cooking anything else, and then she warned the rest of us that nobody was getting dessert unless plates were cleared. But my sister Lena was staring at me, and she looked scared. We didn't talk about it for years, not really. But when we finally did, I didn't even have to explain much. She remembered the night immediately because of the meal. She said she had never forgotten the way I seemed at the table. She told me I was acting like myself, but not like myself. That was how she put it. She said I answered questions when people spoke to me, but there was no feeling behind it, like I was just giving the right responses. She said I kept staring at the wall, barely blinking, and that it felt like I wasn't really there. She described it as mechanical, hollow. And then she said something that still bothers me. She said there was this cold, heavy feeling coming off of me that night, like the room around me had gone damp and wrong, but nobody else seemed to notice it. Not until I suddenly snapped back and panicked. As the years went on, things in my family got harder. My parents' addictions got worse, so trying to talk to them about anything from back then never really helped. My mom's memories of that time are blurry at best, and my dad passed away recently, so there's no way to ask him now. I'm almost 30 now, and I still think about that gap between the porch and the dinner table, because I don't believe I simply forgot what happened. I believe something else was there in my place for a little while, something that knew enough to copy me, but not enough to feel like me. And I guess I'm sharing this because I want to know if anyone else has experienced anything like this around Winsboro, the Piney Woods, or anywhere in East Texas. Over the years, I found a few stories that feel uncomfortably close to mine, especially from that same area and around that same time. So if you've had something similar happen, I'd really like to hear it. I want to tell you about something that still gets under my skin a little. Back when I was in college, years ago now, I used to work these long evening shifts at a diner just off campus, and when I'd finally clock out, usually somewhere between midnight and 2 in the morning, I'd go for a run. Not my brightest life choice, I know. But I knew that neighborhood like it was a map I'd drawn myself. I knew which cars belonged in which driveways. I knew the cracked slabs of sidewalk that could catch your toe if you weren't paying attention. I knew who kept their porch light on all night, who watched TV in the front room until dawn, and which older man walked his terrier at a frankly heroic hour. I also changed my route constantly because I wasn't completely reckless, just mostly. There was one route I didn't take very often because it was the longest one. After 10 or 12 hours on my feet, sometimes my body would just say, "Absolutely not, friend." But whenever I did take it, I always passed this little house across from a park and a narrow creek. And almost every time, I'd see the same young woman outside with a yellow lab. She was usually in scrubs, pink or pale blue most nights, with brown hair pulled back in a messy bun or a ponytail. She looked maybe 24, 25. Lean, quiet, tired in that way people are tired when they've just finished taking care of everybody else. I never wanted to scare her, because I was some random guy jogging by in the middle of the night, so I always crossed to the other side of the street before I reached her house. Then I'd give her a little wave, just a friendly, "I promise I'm not here to be a problem," kind of wave. She never waved back. Not once. She'd just stand there with the dog, and by the time I reached the corner and glanced back, she and the lab were usually gone. I figured she was shy or exhausted, Or maybe she just didn't want to encourage conversation with a sweaty midnight jogger. Fair enough. I didn't think much more about it. Until recently. My mom still lives near that old neighborhood, and she works as a landscape designer. A few weeks ago, she mentioned she'd taken on a project at a cute house across from the park in the creek. I knew exactly which house she meant. So I said, "Hey, does a young woman live there? Brown hair, nurse maybe, has a yellow lab?" My mom said no. The couple living there was elderly, in their 80s. She figured maybe I was remembering someone who'd lived there before. And honestly, that made sense. People move. Dogs get older. Life rearranges the furniture. Then a few days later, my mom called me. The first thing she said was, "What did that girl look like?" I asked, "What girl?" And she said, "The one from your runs, the one outside that house." So I described her. Brown hair, medium length, usually tied back, pink or blue scrubs, slender, around my height, early to mid-20s at the time. And the yellow lab, of course. My mom got very quiet. Then she said, "The couple who lives there had a daughter named Megan. She was a nurse. She died in a car accident on her way home from work when she was 25. And I just sat there, completely still, because my mom kept going. "She died in 1998, she said, and she had a yellow lab named Samson. She used to walk him every night when she got home from her late shift at the hospital." Just so we're clear, I was a kid in 1998. The runs I'm talking about happened between about 2010 and 2014. So yeah, that part did not tuck itself neatly into any reasonable explanation. But it gets stranger. My mom told me that Megan's mother used to leave the porch light on whenever her daughter worked late, so she could see her way up the steps when she came home. Once Megan got home, she'd take Samson outside, bring him back in, and turn the porch light off. That was how her parents knew, when they woke up in the morning, that she had made it home safely. After Megan died, her mother kept turning that porch light on at night out of habit. And some mornings, it would be off. Her husband told her grief was playing tricks on her. Maybe she'd forgotten to turn it on. Maybe she'd turned it off herself and didn't remember. And maybe that's true. Grief can do strange things. But her mother told my mom she always felt like it was Megan's way of saying, "I'm home. I'm okay. You can sleep." Then she asked my mom to thank me for waving. That was the part that broke me. Because all those nights, I thought I was just trying not to scare a quiet woman and her dog. I thought I was being polite from across the street. But to her parents, somehow, it meant their daughter was still being seen, still being greeted, still part of the neighborhood, even after the world said she wasn't supposed to be there anymore. My mom and I cried pretty hard after that. And now, naturally, we've started joking through the tears about how we need to establish our own afterlife communication system someday, because asking for a full-body apparition feels like a lot of pressure. Maybe porch lights, maybe wind chimes, maybe one very specific kitchen drawer opening at dramatic moments. I don't know. All I know is that I still think about that house, that yellow lab, and the woman in blue scrubs who never waved back. And honestly, I'm glad I waved anyway. I've had strange things happen around me for as long as I can remember. Even when I was little, there were moments I couldn't explain. Things I tried to brush off because I didn't know what else to do with them. But when I was a teenager, everything changed. It got darker, heavier. And now, at 33, I still think back on that part of my life and feel this cold little twist in my stomach. I know how it sounds, but this really happened. I swear it on all 10 of my cat's lives. I remember the night it began. I got a phone call from a close friend, and they told me that someone in our group, a friend named Riley, had taken their own life. I don't think I even understood it at first. I just remember this crushing feeling opening up inside me. I cried for hours. I screamed into my pillow. I kept thinking it had to be a mistake, that somebody had misunderstood something. By the time I finally fell asleep, I was completely exhausted. And of course, my bedroom at the time was in the basement. That night, I had a dream that my bedroom door slowly opened. A figure stepped inside. It was tall and thin, dressed completely in black. It had long, dark hair hanging around its head, pale skin, and no face. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. Just blank skin where a face should have been. It walked straight toward my bed like it knew exactly where it was going. Then it pulled out a knife and stabbed me right in the chest. I woke up instantly, panicking, clutching at my heart because I could still feel the pain. There were no marks, no scratches, nothing physical at first, but I was terrified. After that, the dreams kept coming. Sometimes the figure would just stand there and watch me. Sometimes it chased me. Sometimes I'd wake up with that feeling that something had been in the room with me, right beside the bed, waiting for me to open my eyes. The basement already had this horrible energy to it. Damp, quiet, too still. After those dreams started, I hated being down there alone. I'd run up the stairs like something was right behind me. A few months later, my family moved to another state. New house, new town, new everything. I thought maybe leaving that place would make it stop. It didn't. It got worse. I was already in a really bad place mentally. I hated the move. I hated the town. I hated feeling like my whole life had been ripped up and dropped somewhere I didn't belong. And once again, my bedroom was in the basement. This basement felt even worse than the first one. I can't explain it properly, but the air felt wrong down there. Thick somehow. Like the whole room was holding its breath. I refused to go downstairs when I was home alone. The nightmares became more violent. The faceless figure started hurting me in them. Not just chasing or watching anymore, but grabbing me, cutting me, attacking me. Then I started waking up with scratches in random places. My chest, my sides, my legs. Sometimes they were bruises too, dark little fingerprints of something I couldn't prove. The worst experience happened during what felt like a dream, but also not a dream. I was standing beside my bed, looking down at my own sleeping body. I felt this huge wave of fear and anxiety, like my body knew something was about to happen before my mind did. I kept looking at the closet at the foot of my bed, then back at myself lying there. Then the closet doors opened. The figure stepped out. I remember feeling panic rise through me, fast and sharp. I moved closer to my sleeping body, like I was trying to protect myself. The figure didn't have eyes, but I could feel it staring directly at me. Not at my body on the bed, at me, the part of me standing beside it. It moved to the foot of the bed and stretched one hand over my leg. I reached out and placed my hand over my sleeping body's shoulder. For a second, we just stayed like that, me watching it watching me. Then it dropped its hand and grabbed my leg. At the exact same time, I grabbed my own shoulder. I woke up gasping, like I couldn't breathe, absolutely terrified. I turned on my lamp and stayed awake for the rest of the night. I didn't even try to sleep again. This went on for years. The dreams, the scratches, the feeling of being watched, the dread of that basement room. It only stopped after I moved out. And here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. I told my parents about it more than once. They always said it was stress, mental health, an overactive imagination. And honestly, I wanted to believe that. I wanted there to be a normal explanation. But after I moved out, one of my siblings slept in that room for a night. The next morning, they came upstairs shaken and told my parents they'd had a nightmare about me crawling out of the closet on all fours, with blood running from my eyes. I still don't know what to do with that. That basement room is my dad's hobby room now. I don't go in there. I won't. It's always colder than the rest of the house, and it still has that same awful feeling, like something is tucked into the corners, waiting. I don't know why it stopped bothering me. Maybe it let go. Maybe it stayed in that room. Whatever the reason, I'm grateful it ended, because I spent years feeling like something was attached to me, feeding on every bit of fear and misery it could pull out of my life. Hi, I'm Caleb. I'm 23 and I live in a small place outside Bloomington, Indiana. I want to say right away that I've never been the kind of person who believes in ghosts or anything paranormal. I don't watch those shows. I don't go looking for haunted places, and I've always figured most stories like that had a normal explanation hiding somewhere underneath. But lately, I don't know. Something in my life has been pushing me to rethink that. My grandmother passed away not too long ago, and after the funeral, my older brother and I went over to her house to sort through her things. It was quiet in there. Not scary quiet, just that heavy kind of quiet a house gets when the person who made it feel alive isn't there anymore. We each picked out a few things to keep. I took some of her porcelain dishes, a woven rug from the hallway, and a few small keepsakes. My brother took some old gardening books, a box of pressed flowers, and a couple of lamps she always liked. Then I noticed the painting. It was leaning against the wall in a spare room, half covered by a sheet. My grandfather had painted it years ago, apparently as a birthday present for my grandma. He died when I was younger, so I don't remember a lot about him, but I knew he liked to paint. Mostly landscapes, sometimes portraits. Nothing strange, really. But this one felt different. It showed a man sitting alone on a cluster of dark rocks, fishing under a black, stormy sky. The water looked too still, almost like glass, and the man's face was turned just enough that you couldn't quite see it. My grandfather used to paint himself into scenes sometimes, so I assumed it was supposed to be him. The thing is, as far as I know, he never fished. Not once. It wasn't an evil-looking painting. It wasn't bloody or creepy in an obvious way. It just felt wrong as a birthday gift. Sad, maybe. Lonely. Still, for whatever reason, I took it home. At first, nothing happened. I put the painting in my closet and forgot about it for a while. Then, one weekend, I decided it felt rude to keep something my grandfather made shoved behind coats and boxes, so I took it out and set it on top of a cabinet in the living room. That's when things changed. About 3 weeks ago, I was brushing my teeth before bed when I heard something slam against the floor with this unbelievable force. Not like something fell, like something had been thrown. I ran into the living room, and my TV remote was gone from the coffee table. I found it lying halfway inside my bedroom, several yards away. There's no way it could have landed there on its own. It would have had to fly across the room. I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of it, but my brain just kind of rejected the whole thing. I told myself maybe I had left it there earlier. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe anything except what it looked like. So I went to bed. A few minutes after I lay down, I heard a man whisper. It was close. Not outside, not through the wall. Close. I couldn't make out the word exactly, but it sounded like he said, door. Or maybe, floor. Just one word, soft and rough, like somebody whispering through a dry throat. I froze for a second, then tried to convince myself I was half asleep. I had left my bedroom door mostly closed, but not latched, so there was a narrow gap between the door and the frame. and through that gap, I saw something standing in the hallway. It looked like a person-shaped shadow, tall, still. No clear face, no real edges, just darkness gathered into the shape of a man. But the eyes were there. They were white, not glowing like headlights exactly, but bright enough that I could see them in the dark. And they were looking straight at me. I have never felt fear like that in my life. It was like my body forgot how to work. I couldn't breathe right. I couldn't call out. I could barely move. I keep a handgun in the drawer beside my bed. I reached for it without taking my eyes off the thing in the doorway. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I pointed it at the figure. It didn't move. I fired. The sound that came after was worse than the gunshot. It was this high, awful screech, like an animal dying somewhere between a fox and a deer. It filled the hallway for 1 second, maybe 2, and then it was gone. I got up, turned on every light I could reach, and opened the bedroom door. There was nothing there. No person, no animal, no blood. No damage, except the bullet hole where I'd missed the door frame and hit the wall. I called 911 because at that point I was convinced someone had broken into my house, or that I had just shot at something real and couldn't find it. The police came, searched the place, checked the doors and windows, and found no sign of anyone. They were professional about it, but I could tell how it looked. Since then, things have kept happening. Small things at first, tapping from inside the walls, the sound of footsteps in the living room when I'm in bed, that painting shifting slightly on the cabinet, even though I swear I never touch it. Sometimes I wake up and feel like someone is standing close to the bed, watching me breathe. And every now and then, I hear that whisper again. I still can't tell if it's saying door or floor. I don't know what to do anymore. I can't afford to move. I can't sleep properly. I feel nervous in my own home all the time, and it's starting to wear me down in a way I don't know how to explain without sounding unstable. I used to think stories like this were just stories. Now I'm living inside one, and I want out. I want to tell you about something that happened to me back in early June of 2023 when I was 16. I woke up in the middle of the night, somewhere around 2:40 in the morning, and from my bed I could see straight out into the hallway. I know, sleeping with my door open was probably my first mistake. At first, I wasn't scared. There was a man standing there, and in the dark, he looked a lot like my dad. My dad has always been the kind of person who gets up during the night, so I didn't think much of it. I just looked toward him and said, "Hey." And the second I said it, he faded away. Not walked away, not stepped back, just faded. I remember lying there for a moment, trying to decide if I should be scared or not, but I was so tired that my brain barely reacted. I had put lip balm on right before I went to sleep, and after seeing him disappear, I remember touching my lips, rolling over, and trying to convince myself it was nothing. About 5 hours later, I woke up to my mom talking on the phone in the living room. Her voice sounded wrong. Not loud exactly, but shaky. Then she rushed into my parents' bedroom, and I got up and followed her because nobody calls that early unless something has happened. She handed the phone to my dad. That was when we found out my grandpa, my dad's father, had passed away. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. He died back in Ohio, where I'm originally from, and at the time we were living more than 30 hours away. We packed up and drove there, and once we arrived, I learned what had happened. According to what the coroner told the family, my grandpa had gotten up in the middle of the night, around 4:30 Eastern Time. He went downstairs to the bathroom, got sick, stood up, and then had what they called a widowmaker heart attack. I live in Mountain Time, So when I thought about it later, the timing lined up almost perfectly with the moment I woke up and saw that figure in the hallway. While we were in Ohio, I found an old photo album of my grandparents. There were pictures of my grandpa when he was younger, and when I saw them, my stomach went cold. The man I had seen in the hallway didn't just look like my dad. He looked like my grandpa, only younger. A few months after he passed, strange things started happening in my bathroom. The light began flickering badly, and it still does. We changed the bulbs, we checked the wiring. Nothing fixed it. The weirdest part is that my family says it only seems to happen when I'm around. There was another night when I woke up to my cat growling at that same bathroom. She is usually gentle and sweet, not the kind of cat that growls at nothing. But she was staring right into the dark doorway, low to the ground, making that awful warning sound animals make when they see something you can't. I've moved out of that house since then, but I'm supposed to move back next month. And honestly, I'm scared. I don't know if I'm being irrational, or if grief made me connect things that don't belong together. I don't know if this is something people experience when someone close to them dies, or if there really is something attached to me now. All I know is that I saw someone in the hallway that night. And later, when I looked at those old pictures, I knew exactly who it was.